Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time there dwelt on the outskirts of a large forest a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children. The boy was called Hansel, and the girl Gretel. He had always little enough to live on, and once, when there was a great famine in the land, he couldn't even provide them with daily bread. One night, as he was tossing about in bed, full of cares and worry, he sighed and said to his wife, "What's to become of us? How are we to support our poor children now that we have nothing more for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we'll take the children out into the thickest part of the wood. There we shall light a fire for them and give them each a piece of bread. Then we'll go on to our work and leave them alone. They won't be able to find their way home, and we shall thus be rid of them." "No, wife," said her husband, "that I won't do. How could I find it in my heart to leave my children alone in the wood? The wild beasts would soon come and tear them to pieces." "Oh, you fool," said she. "Then we must all 4 die of hunger, and you may just as well go and plane the boards for our coffins." And she left him no peace till he consented. "But I can't help feeling sorry for the poor children," added the husband. The children, too, had not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitterly and spoke to Hansel. "Now it's all up with us." "No, no, Gretel," said Hansel, "don't fret yourself. I'll be able to find a way to escape. No fear." And when the old people had fallen asleep, he got up, slipped on his little coat, opened the back door, and stole out. The moon was shining clearly, and the white pebbles which lay in front of the house glittered like bits of silver. Hansel bent down and filled his pocket with as many of them as he could cram in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, my dear little sister, and go to sleep. God will not desert us." And he lay down in bed again. At daybreak, even before the sun was up, the woman came and woke the 2 children. "Get up, you lie-a-beds, we're all going to the forest to fetch wood." She gave them each a bit of bread and said, "There's something for your luncheon, but don't you eat it up before, for it's all you'll get." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the stones in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. After they had walked for a little, Hansel stood still and looked back at the house, and this maneuver he repeated again and again. His father observed him and said, "Hansel, what are you gazing at there, and why do you always remain behind? Take care and don't lose your footing." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I am looking back at my white kitten, which is sitting on the roof, waving me a farewell." The woman exclaimed, "What a donkey you are!" "That isn't your kitten. That's the morning sun shining on the chimney." But Hansel had not looked back at his kitten, but had always dropped one of the white pebbles out of his pocket onto the path. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, go and fetch a lot of wood, and I'll light a fire that you may not feel cold." Hansel and Gretel heaped up brushwood till they had made a pile nearly the size of a small hill. The brushwood was set fire to, and when the flames leaped high, the woman said, "Now lie down at the fire, children, and rest yourselves. We are going into the forest to cut down wood. When we've finished, we'll come back and fetch you." Hansel and Gretel sat down beside the fire, and at midday ate their little bits of bread. They heard the strokes of the axe, so they thought their father was quite near. But it was no axe they heard, but a bough he had tied on a dead tree, and that was blown about by the wind. And when they had sat for a long time, their eyes closed with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When they awoke at last, it was pitch dark. Gretel began to cry and said, "How are we ever to get out of the wood?" But Hansel comforted her. "Wait a bit," he said, "till the moon is up, and then we'll find our way sure enough." And when the full moon had risen, He took his sister by the hand and followed the pebbles, which shone like new threepenny bits, and showed them the path. They walked on through the night, and at daybreak reached their father's house again. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it, she exclaimed, "You naughty children! What a time you've slept in the wood! We thought you were never going to come back." But the father rejoiced, for his conscience had reproached him for leaving his children behind by themselves. Not long afterward, there was again great dearth in the land, and the children heard their mother address their father thus in bed one night: "Everything is eaten up once more. We have only half a loaf in the house, and when that's done, it's all up with us. The children must be got rid of. We'll lead them deeper into the wood this time, so that they won't be able to find their way out again. There is no other way of saving ourselves." The man's heart smote him heavily, and he thought, surely it would be better to share the last bite with one's children. But his wife wouldn't listen to his arguments, and did nothing but scold and reproach him. If a man yields once, he's done for, and so, because he had given in the first time, he was forced to do so the second. But the children were awake, and had heard the conversation. When the old people were asleep, Hansel got up and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles again, as he had done the first time. But the woman had barred the door, and Hansel couldn't get out. But he consoled his little sister and said, "Don't cry, Gretel, and sleep peacefully, for God is sure to help us." At early dawn, the woman came and made the children get up. They received their bit of bread, but it was even smaller than the time before. On the way to the wood, Hansel crumbled it in his pocket, and every few minutes he stood still and dropped a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, what are you stopping and looking about you for?" said the father. "I'm looking back at my little pigeon, which is sitting on the roof waving me a farewell," answered Hansel. "Fool," said the wife, "that isn't your pigeon. It's the morning sun glittering on the chimney." But Hansel gradually threw all his crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, farther than they had ever been in their lives before. Then a big fire was lit again, and the mother said, "Just sit down there, children, and if you're tired you can sleep a bit. We're going into the forest to cut down wood, and in the evening when we're finished we'll come back to fetch you." At midday, Gretel divided her bread with Hansel, for he had strewn his all along their path. Then they fell asleep, and evening passed away. But nobody came to the poor children. They didn't awake till it was pitch dark, and Hansel comforted his sister, saying, "Only wait, Gretel, till the moon rises, then we shall see the breadcrumbs. I scattered along the path. They will show us the way back to the house." When the moon appeared, they got up, but they found no crumbs, for the thousands of birds that fly about the woods and fields had picked them all up. "Never mind," said Hansel to Gretel. "You'll see we'll find a way out." But all the same, they did not. They wandered about the whole night, and the next day, from morning till evening, but they could not find a path out of the wood. They were very hungry too, for they had nothing to eat but a few berries they found growing on the ground, and at last they were so tired that their legs refused to carry them any longer, so they lay down under a tree and fell fast asleep. On the third morning after they had left their father's house, they set about their wandering again, but only got deeper and deeper into the wood. And now they felt that if help did not come to them soon, they must perish. At midday, they saw a beautiful little snow-white bird sitting on a branch, which sang so sweetly that they stopped still and listened to it. And when its song was finished, it flapped its wings and flew on in front of them. They followed it and came to a little house, on the roof of which it perched. And when they came quite near, they saw that the cottage was made of bread and roofed with cakes, while the window was made of transparent sugar. "Now we'll set to," said Hansel, "and have a regular blowout. One, I'll eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, can eat some of the window, which you'll find a sweet morsel." Hansel stretched up his hand and broke off a little bit of the roof to see what it was like, and Gretel went to the casement and began to nibble at it. Thereupon a shrill voice called out from the room inside, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who's nibbling my house?" The children answered, "'Tis heaven's own child, the tempest wild," and went on eating, without putting themselves about. Hansel, who thoroughly appreciated the roof, tore down a big bit of it, while Gretel pushed out a whole round window pane, and sat down, the better to enjoy it. Suddenly the door opened, and an ancient dame leaning on a staff hobbled out. Hansel and Gretel were so terrified that they let what they had in their hands fall. But the old woman shook her head and said, "Oh, ho, you dear children, who led you here? Just come in and stay with me, no ill shall befall you." She took them both by the hand and led them into the house, and laid a most sumptuous dinner before them, milk and sugared pancakes with apples and nuts. After they had finished, 2 beautiful little white beds were prepared for them, and when Hansel and Gretel lay down in them, they felt as if they had got into heaven. The old woman had appeared to be most friendly, but she was really an old witch who had waylaid the children and had only built the little bread house in order to lure them in. When anyone came into her power, she killed, cooked, and ate him, and held a regular feast day for the occasion. Now witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but, like beasts, they have a keen sense of smell and know when human beings pass by. When Hansel and Gretel fell into her hands, she laughed maliciously and said jeeringly, "I've got them now. They shan't escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she rose up, and when she saw them both sleeping so peacefully with their round, rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That'll be a dainty bite." Then she seized Hansel with her bony hand and carried him into a little stable and barred the door on him. He might scream as much as he liked, it did him no good. Then she went to Gretel, shook her till she awoke, and cried, "Get up, you lazy bones, fetch water and cook something for your brother. When he's fat, I'll eat him up." Gretel began to cry bitterly, but it was of no use. She had to do what the wicked witch bade her, so the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the old woman hobbled out to the stable and cried, "Hansel, put out your finger that I may feel if you are getting fat." But Hansel always stretched out a bone, and the old dame, whose eyes were dim, couldn't see it, and thinking always it was Hansel's finger, wondered why he fattened so slowly. When 4 weeks had passed and Hansel still remained thin, she lost patience and determined to wait no longer. "Hi, Gretel," she called to the girl. "Be quick and get some water. Hansel may be fat or thin. I'm going to kill him tomorrow and cook him." "Oh, how?" How the poor little sister sobbed as she carried the water, and how the tears rolled down her cheeks. "Kind heaven help us now," she cried. "If only the wild beasts in the wood had eaten us, then at least we should have died together." "Just hold your peace," said the old hag. "It won't help you." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the kettle full of water and light the fire. "First we'll bake," said the old dame. "I've heated the oven already and kneaded the dough." She pushed Gretel out to the oven, from which fiery flames were already issuing. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it's properly heated, so that we can shove in the bread." For when she had got Gretel in, she meant to close the oven and let the girl bake, that she might eat her up too. But Gretel perceived her intention and said, "I don't know how I'm to do it. How do I get in?" "You silly goose," said the hag. The opening is big enough. See, I could get in myself." And she crawled toward it and poked her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a shove that sent her right in, shut the iron door, and drew the bolt. "Gracious, how she yelled! It was quite horrible, but Gretel fled, and the wretched old woman was left to perish miserably. Gretel flew straight to Hansel, opened the little stable door, and cried, "Hansel, we are free! The old witch is dead!" Then Hansel sprang like a bird out of a cage when the door is opened. How they rejoiced, and fell on each other's necks, and jumped for joy, and kissed one another. And as they had no longer any cause for fear, they went in the old hag's house, and here they found, in every corner of the room, boxes with pearls and precious stones. "These are even better than pebbles," said Hansel, and crammed his pockets full of them, and Gretel said, "I too will bring something home." And she filled her apron full. "But now," said Hansel, "let's go and get well away from the witch's wood." When they had wandered about for some hours, they came to a big lake. "We can't get over," said Hansel. "I see no bridge of any sort or kind." "Yes, and there's no ferry boat either," answered Gretel. "But look, there swims a white duck. If I ask her, she'll help us over." And she called out, "Here are 2 children, mournful very. Seeing neither bridge nor ferry, take us upon your white back, and row us over, quack, quack." The duck swam toward them, and Hansel got on her back and bade his little sister sit beside him. "No," answered Gretel, "we should be too heavy a load for the duck. She shall carry us across separately." The good bird did this, and when they were landed safely on the other side, and had gone for a while, the wood became more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw their father's house in the distance. Then they set off to run, and bounding into the room fell on their father's neck. The man had not passed a happy hour since he left them in the wood, but the woman had died. Gretel shook out her apron so that the pearls and precious stones rolled about the room, and Hansel threw down one handful after the other out of his pocket. Thus all their troubles were ended, and they lived happily ever afterward. My story is done. See, there runs a little mouse. Anyone who catches it may make himself a large fur cap out of it. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time there lived in a certain village a little country girl, the prettiest creature was ever seen. Her mother was excessively fond of her, and her grandmother doted on her still more. This good woman had made for her a little Red Riding Hood, which became the girl so extremely well that everybody called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother, having made some custards, said to her, "Go, my dear, and see how thy grandmamma does, for I hear she has been very ill. Carry her a custard and this little pot of butter." Little Red Riding Hood set out immediately to go to her grandmother, who lived in another village. As she was going through the wood, she met with Gaffer Wolf, who had a very great mind to eat her up, but he dared not, because of some faggot-makers hard by in the forest. He asked her whither she was going. The poor child, who did not know that it was dangerous to stay and hear a wolf talk, said to him, "I am going to see my grandmamma and carry her a custard and a little pot of butter from my mamma." "Does she live far off?" said the wolf. "Oh, aye," answered Little Red Riding Hood. "It is beyond that mill you see there, at the first house in the village." "Well," said the wolf, "and I'll go and see her too. I'll go this way, and you go that, and we shall see who will be there soonest." The wolf began to run as fast as he could, taking the nearest way, and the little girl went by that farthest about, diverting herself in gathering nuts, running after butterflies, and making nosegays of such little flowers as she met with. The wolf was not long before he got to the old woman's house. He knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" "Your grandchild," "Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf, counterfeiting her voice. "Who has brought you a custard and a little pot of butter sent you by Mamma?" The good grandmother, who was in bed because she was somewhat ill, cried out, "Pull the bobbin, and the latch will go up." The wolf pulled the bobbin, and the door opened, and then presently he fell upon the good woman and ate her up in a moment, for it was above 3 days that he had not touched a bit. He then shut the door and went into the grandmother's bed, expecting Little Red Riding Hood, who came some time afterward and knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" Little Red Riding Hood, hearing the big voice of the wolf, was at first afraid, but believing her grandmother had got a cold and was hoarse, answered, "'Tis your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood. Who has brought you a custard and a little pot of butter Mamma sends you?" The wolf cried out to her, softening his voice as much as he could, "Pull the bobbin, and the latch will go up." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the bobbin, and the door opened. The wolf, seeing her come in, said to her, hiding himself under the bedclothes, "Put the custard and the little pot of butter upon the stool, and come and lie down with me." Little Red Riding Hood undressed herself and went into bed, where, being greatly amazed to see how her grandmother looked in her night-clothes, she said to her, "Grandmamma, what great arms you have got! That is the better to hug thee, my dear. Grandmamma, what great legs you have got! That is to run the better, my child. Grandmamma, what great ears you have got! That is to hear the better, my child. Grandmamma, what great eyes you have got! It is to see the better, my child. Grandmamma, what great teeth you have got! That is to eat thee up." And, saying these words, this wicked wolf fell upon Little Red Riding Hood and ate her all up. Little Thumb. There was, once upon a time, a man and his wife Faggot, makers by trade, who had several children, all boys. The eldest was but 10 years old, and the youngest only 7. They were very poor, and their 7 children incommoded them greatly, because not one of them was able to earn his bread. That which gave them yet more uneasiness was that the youngest was of a very puny constitution, and scarce ever spoke a word, which made them take that for stupidity which was a sign of good sense. He was very little, and when born no bigger than one's thumb, which made him be called Little Thumb. The poor child bore the blame of whatsoever was done amiss in the house, and, guilty or not, was always in the wrong. He was, notwithstanding, more cunning, and had a far greater share of wisdom than all his brothers put together, and, if he spake little, he heard and thought the more. There happened now to come a very bad year, and the famine was so great that these poor people resolved to rid themselves of their children. One evening, when they were all in bed, and the faggot-maker was sitting with his wife at the fire, he said to her, with his heart ready to burst with grief, "Thou seest plainly that we are not able to keep our children, and I cannot see them starve to death before my face. I am resolved to lose them in the wood tomorrow, which may very easily be done, for while they are busy in tying up faggots, we may run away and leave them without their taking any notice." "Ah!" cried his wife, "and canst thou thyself have the heart to take thy children out along with thee on purpose to lose them?" In vain did her husband represent to her their extreme poverty. She would not consent to it. She was indeed poor, but she was their mother. However, having considered what a grief it would be to her to see them perish with hunger, she at last consented, and went to bed all in tears. Little Thumb heard every word that had been spoken, for observing, as he lay in his bed, that they were talking very busily, he got up softly, and hid himself under his father's stool, that he might hear what they said without being seen. He went to bed again, but did not sleep a wink all the rest of the night, thinking on what he had to do. He got up early in the morning and went to the riverside, where he filled his pockets full of small white pebbles and then returned home. They all went abroad, but Little Thumb never told his brothers one syllable of what he knew. They went into a very thick forest, where they could not see one another at 10 paces distance. The faggot maker began to cut wood, and the children to gather up the sticks to make faggots. Their father and mother, seeing them busy at their work, got away from them insensibly, and ran away from them all at once, along a byway through the winding bushes. When the children saw they were left alone, they began to cry as loud as they could. Little Thumb let them cry on, knowing very well how to get home again, for, as he came, he took care to drop all along the way the little white pebbles he had in his pockets. Then he said to them, "Be not afraid, brothers. Father and mother have left us here, but I will lead you home again, only follow me." They did so, and he brought them home by the very same way they came into the forest. They dared not go in, but sat themselves down at the door, listening to what their father and mother were saying. The very moment the faggot maker and his wife reached home, the lord of the manor sent them 10 crowns, which he had owed them a long while, and which they never expected. This gave them new life, for the poor people were almost famished. The faggot maker sent his wife immediately to the butcher's. As it was a long while since they had eaten a bit, she bought thrice as much meat as would sup 2 people. When they had eaten, the woman said, "Alas, where are now our poor children? They would make a good feast of what we have left here. But it was you, William, who had a mind to lose them. I told you we should repent of it. What are they now doing in the forest? Alas, dear God, the wolves have perhaps already eaten them up. Thou art very inhuman thus to have lost thy children." The faggot maker grew at last quite out of patience, for she repeated it above 20 times, that they should repent of it, and that she was in the right of it for so saying. He threatened to beat her if she did not hold her tongue. It was not that the faggot maker was not perhaps more vexed than his wife, but that she teased him, and that he was of the humour of a great many others who love wives to speak well, but think those very importunate who are continually doing so. She was half drowned in tears, crying out, "Alas, where are now my children, my poor children?" She spoke this so very loud that the children, who were at the gate, began to cry out all together, "Here we are! Here we are!" She ran immediately to open the door and said, hugging them, "I am glad to see you, my dear children. You are very hungry and weary, and my poor Peter, thou art horribly bemeared. Come in and let me clean thee." Now, you must know that Peter was her eldest son, whom she loved above all the rest, because he was somewhat carroty, as she herself was. They sat down to supper, and ate with such a good appetite as pleased both father and mother, whom they acquainted how frightened they were in the forest, speaking almost always all together. The good folks were extremely glad to see their children once more at home, and this joy continued while the 10 crowns lasted. But when the money was all gone, they fell again into their former uneasiness, and resolved to lose them again, and, that they might be the surer of doing it, to carry them to a much greater distance than before. They could not talk of this so secretly, but they were overheard by Little Thumb, who made account to get out of this difficulty as well as the former. But, though he got up very early in the morning to go and pick up some little pebbles, he was disappointed, for he found the house door double locked, and was at a stand what to do. When their father had given each of them a piece of bread for their breakfast, Little Thumb fancied he might make use of this instead of the pebbles by throwing it in little bits all along the way they should pass, and so he put the bread in his pocket. Their father and mother brought them into the thickest and most obscure part of the forest, when, stealing away into a bypath, they there left them. Little Thumb was not very uneasy at it, for he thought he could easily find the way again by means of his bread, which he had scattered all along as he came. But he was very much surprised when he could not find so much as one crumb. The birds had come and had eaten it up, every bit. They were now in great affliction, for the farther they went, the more they were out of their way, and were more and more bewildered in the forest. Night now came on, and there arose a terribly high wind, which made them dreadfully afraid. They fancied they heard on every side of them the howling of wolves coming to eat them up. They scarce dared to speak or turn their heads. After this, it rained very hard, which wetted them to the skin. Their feet slipped at every step they took, and they fell into the mire, whence they got up in a very dirty pickle. Their hands were quite benumbed. Little Thumb climbed up to the top of a tree to see if he could discover anything, and having turned his head about on every side, he saw at last a glimmering light like that of a candle, but a long way from the forest. He came down, and, when upon the ground, he could see it no more, which grieved him sadly. However, having walked for some time with his brothers toward that side on which he had seen the light, he perceived it again as he came out of the wood. They came at last to the house where this candle was, not without an abundance of fear, for very often they lost sight of it, which happened every time they came into a bottom. They knocked at the door, and a good woman came and opened it. She asked them what they would have. Little Thumb told her they were poor children who had been lost in the forest and desired to lodge there for God's sake. The woman, seeing them so very pretty, began to weep, and said to them, "Alas, poor babies, whither are ye come? Do ye know that this house belongs to a cruel ogre who eats up little children?" "Ah, dear madam," answered Little Thumb, who trembled every joint of him as well as his brothers, "what shall we do? To be sure, the wolves of the forest will devour us to-night, if you refuse us to lie here. And so we would rather the gentleman should eat us, and perhaps he may take pity upon us, especially if you please to beg it of him." The ogre's wife, who believed she could conceal them from her husband till morning, let them come in, and brought them to warm themselves at a very good fire, for there was a whole sheep upon the spit, roasting for the ogre's supper. As they began to be a little warm, they heard 3 or 4 great raps at the door. This was the ogre, who had come home. Upon this she hid them under the bed and went to open the door. The ogre presently asked if supper was ready and the wine drawn, and then sat himself down to table. The sheep was as yet all raw and bloody, but he liked it the better for that. He sniffed about to the right and left, saying, "I smell fresh meat." "What you smell so," said his wife, "must be the calf which I have just now killed and flayed." "I smell fresh meat, I tell thee once more," replied the ogre, looking crossly at his wife, "and there is something here which I do not understand." As he spoke these words, he got up from the table and went directly to the bed. "Ah, ah," said he, "I see then how thou wouldst cheat me, thou cursed woman. I know not why I do not eat thee up too, but it is well for thee that thou art a tough old carrion. Here is good game, which comes very quickly to entertain 3 ogres of my acquaintance, who are to pay me a visit in a day or 2. With that he dragged them out from under the bed one by one. The poor children fell upon their knees and begged his pardon, but they had to do with one of the most cruel ogres in the world, who, far from having any pity on them, had already devoured them with his eyes, and told his wife they would be delicate eating when tossed up with good savoury sauce. He then took a great knife, and, coming up to these poor children, whetted it upon a great wet stone which he held in his left hand. He had already taken hold of one of them when his wife said to him, "Why need you do it now? Is it not time enough to-morrow?" "Hold your prating," said the ogre. "They will eat the tenderer." "But you have so much meat already," replied his wife. "You have no occasion. Here are a calf, 2 sheep, and half a hog." "That is true," said the ogre. "Give them their belly full, that they may not fall away, and put them to bed." The good woman was overjoyed at this, and gave them a good supper, but they were so much afraid they could not eat a bit. As for the ogre, he sat down again to drink, being highly pleased that he had got wherewithal to treat his friends. He drank 12 glasses, more than ordinary, which got up into his head and obliged him to go to bed. The ogre had 7 daughters, all little children, and these young ogresses had all of them very fine complexions, because they used to eat fresh meat like their father, but they had little grey eyes, quite round, hooked noses, and very long sharp teeth, standing at a good distance from each other. They were not as yet over and above mischievous, but they promised very fair for it, for they had already bitten little children, that they might suck their blood. They had been put to bed early, with every one a crown of gold upon her head. There was in the same chamber a bed of the like bigness, and it was into this bed the ogre's wife put the 7 little boys, after which she went to bed to her husband. Little Thumb, who had observed that the ogre's daughters had crowns of gold upon their heads, and was afraid lest the ogre should repent his not killing them, got up about midnight, and, taking his brother's bonnets and his own, went very softly and put them upon the heads of the 7 little ogresses, after having taken off their crowns of gold, which he put upon his own head and his brother's, that the ogre might take them for his daughters, and his daughters for the little boys whom he wanted to kill. All this succeeded according to his desire, for the ogre, waking about midnight, and sorry that he deferred to do that till morning, which he might have done overnight, threw himself hastily out of bed, and, taking his great knife, "Let us see," said he, "how our little rogues do, and not make 2 jobs of the matter." He then went up, groping all the way, into his daughter's chamber, and, coming to the bed where the little boys lay, and who were every soul of them fast asleep, except little Thumb, who was terribly afraid when he found the ogre fumbling about his head, as he had done about his brothers, the ogre, feeling the golden crowns, said, "I should have made a fine piece of work of it, truly. I find I drank too much last night." Then he went to the bed where the girls lay, and, having found the boys' little bonnets, "Ah," said he, "my merry lads, are you there? Let us work as we ought." And saying these words, without more ado, he cut the throats of all his 7 daughters. Well pleased with what he had done, he went to bed again to his wife. So soon as little Thumb heard the ogre snore, he waked his brothers, and bade them all put on their clothes presently and follow him. They stole down softly into the garden, and got over the wall. They kept running about all night, and trembled all the while, without knowing which way they went. The ogre, when he awoke, said to his wife, "Go upstairs and dress those young rascals who came here last night." The wife was very much surprised at this goodness of her husband, not dreaming after what manner she should dress them, but, thinking that he had ordered her to go and put on their clothes, she went up, and was strangely astonished when she perceived her 7 daughters killed, and weltering in their blood. She fainted away, for this is the first expedient almost all women find in such cases. The ogre, fearing his wife would be too long in doing what he had ordered, went up himself to help her. He was no less amazed than his wife at this frightful spectacle. "Ah, what have I done?" cried he. "The wretches shall pay for it, and that instantly." He threw a pitcher of water upon his wife's face, and, having brought her to herself, said, Give me quickly my boots of 7 leagues, that I may go and catch them." He went out, and, having run over a vast deal of ground, both on this side and that, he came at last into the very road where the poor children were, and not above 100 paces from their father's house. They espied the ogre, who went at one step from mountain to mountain, and over rivers as easily as the narrowest kennels. Little Thumb, seeing a hollow rock near the place where they were, made his brothers hide themselves in it, and crowded into it himself, minding always what would become of the ogre. The ogre, who found himself much tired with his long and fruitless journey, for these boots of 7 leagues greatly fatigued the wearer, had a great mind to rest himself, and, by chance, went to sit down upon the rock where the little boys had hid themselves. As it was impossible he could be more weary than he was, he fell asleep, and, after reposing himself some time, began to snore so frightfully that the poor children were no less afraid of him than when he held up his great knife and was going to cut their throats. Little Thumb was not so much frightened as his brothers, and told them that they should run away immediately toward home, while the ogre was asleep so soundly, and that they should not be in any pain about him. They took his advice and got home presently. Little Thumb came up to the ogre, pulled off his boots gently and put them on his own legs. The boots were very long and large, but as they were fairies, they had the gift of becoming big and little, according to the legs of those who wore them, so that they fitted his feet and legs as well as if they had been made on purpose for him. He went immediately to the ogre's house, where he saw his wife crying bitterly for the loss of the ogre's murdered daughters. "Your husband," said Little Thumb, "is in very great danger, being taken by a gang of thieves, who have sworn to kill him if he does not give them all his gold and silver. The very moment they held their daggers at his throat, he perceived me, and desired me to come and tell you the condition he is in, and that you should give me whatsoever he has of value, without retaining any one thing, for otherwise they will kill him without mercy. And, as his case is very pressing, he desired me to make use, you see I have them on, of his boots, that I might make the more haste, and to show you that I do not impose upon you." The good woman, being sadly frightened, gave him all she had, for this ogre was a very good husband, though he used to eat up little children. Little Thumb, having thus got all the ogre's money, came home to his father's house, where he was received with abundance of joy. There are many people who do not agree in this circumstance, and pretend that Little Thumb never robbed the ogre at all, and that he only thought he might very justly, and with a safe conscience, take off his boots of 7 leagues, because he made no other use of them but to run after little children. These folks affirm that they are very well assured of this, and the more, as having drunk and eaten often at the faggot-maker's house. They aver that, when Little Thumb had taken off the ogre's boots, he went to court, where he was informed that they were very much in pain about a certain army which was 200 leagues off, and the success of a battle. He went, say they, to the king, and told him that, if he desired it, he would bring him news from the army before night. The king promised him a great sum of money upon that condition. Little Thumb was as good as his word, and returned that very same night with the news, and, this first expedition causing him to be known, he got whatever he pleased, for the king paid him very well for carrying his orders to the army. After having for some time carried on the business of a messenger, and gained thereby great wealth, he went home to his father, where it was impossible to express the joy they were all in at his return. He made the whole family very easy, bought places for his father and brothers, and, by that means, settled them very handsomely in the world, and, in the meantime, made his court to perfection. Prince Darling. Once upon a time there lived a king who was so just and kind that his subjects called him the Good King, It happened one day, when he was out hunting, that a little white rabbit, which his dogs were chasing, sprang into his arms for shelter. The king stroked it gently and said to it, "Well, Bunny, as you have come to me for protection, I will see that nobody hurts you." And he took it home to his palace and had it put in a pretty little house with all sorts of nice things to eat. That night, when he was alone in his room, a beautiful lady suddenly appeared before him. Her long dress was as white as snow, and she had a crown of white roses upon her head. The good king was very much surprised to see her, for he knew his door had been tightly shut, and he could not think how she had got in. But she said to him, "I am the fairy Truth. I was passing through the wood when you were out hunting, and I wished to find out if you were really good, as everybody said you were. So I took the shape of a little rabbit and came to your arms for shelter. For I know that those who are merciful to animals will be still kinder to their fellow men. If you had refused to help me, I should have been certain that you were wicked. I thank you for the kindness you have shown me, which has made me your friend forever. You have only to ask me for anything you want, and I promise that I will give it to you." "Madam," said the good king, "since you are a fairy, you no doubt know all my wishes. I have but one son whom I love very dearly. That is why he is called Prince Darling. If you are really good enough to wish to do me a favor, I beg that you will become his friend." "With all my heart," answered the fairy. "I can make your son the handsomest prince in the world, or the richest, or the most powerful. Choose whichever you like for him." "I do not ask either of these things for my son," replied the good king. "But if you will make him the best of princes, I shall indeed be grateful to you. What good would it do him to be rich, or handsome, or to possess all the kingdoms of the world if he were wicked? You know well he would still be unhappy. Only a good man can be really contented." "You are quite right," answered the fairy, "but it is not in my power to make Prince Darling a good man. Unless he will help me, he must himself try hard to become good. I can only promise to give him good advice, to scold him for his faults, and to punish him if he will not correct and punish himself." The good king was quite satisfied with his promise, and very soon afterward he died. Prince Darling was very sorry, for he loved his father with all his heart, and he would willingly have given all his kingdoms and all his treasures of gold and silver if they could have kept the good king with him. 2 days afterward, when the prince had gone to bed, the fairy suddenly appeared to him and said, "I promised your father that I would be your friend, and to keep my word I have come to bring you a present." At the same time, she put a little gold ring upon his finger. "Take great care of this ring," she said. "It is more precious than diamonds. Every time you do a bad deed it will prick your finger, but if, in spite of its pricking, you go on in your own evil way, you will lose my friendship, and I shall become your enemy." So saying, the fairy disappeared, leaving Prince Darling very much astonished. For some time he behaved so well that the ring never pricked him, and that made him so contented that his subjects called him Prince Darling the Happy. One day, however, he went out hunting, but could get no sport, which put him in a very bad temper. It seemed to him as he rode along that his ring was pressing into his finger. But as it did not prick him, he did not heed it. When he got home and went to his own room, his little dog Bibi ran to meet him, jumping round him with pleasure. "Get away," said the prince quite gruffly. "I don't want you. You are in the way." The poor little dog, who didn't understand this at all, pulled at his coat to make him at least look at her, and this made Prince Darling so cross that he gave her quite a hard kick. Instantly his ring pricked him sharply, as if it had been a pin. He was very much surprised, and sat down in a corner of his room feeling quite ashamed of himself. "I believe the fairy is laughing at me," he thought. "Surely I can have done no great wrong in just kicking a tiresome animal. What is the good of my being ruler of a great kingdom if I am not even allowed to beat my own dog?" "I am not making fun of you," said a voice, answering Prince Darling's thoughts. "You have committed 3 faults. First of all, you were out of temper because you could not have what you wanted, and you thought all men and animals were only made to do your pleasure. Then you were really angry, which is very naughty indeed. And lastly, you were cruel to a poor little animal who did not in the least deserve to be ill-treated. I know you are far above a little dog, but if it were right and allowable that great people should ill-treat all who are beneath them, I might at this moment beat you or kill you, for a fairy is greater than a man. The advantage of possessing a great empire is not to be able to do the evil that one desires, but to do all the good that one possibly can." The prince saw how naughty he had been, and promised to try and do better in future, but he did not keep his word. The fact was, he had been brought up by a foolish nurse who had spoiled him when he was little. If he wanted anything, he only had to cry and fret and stamp his feet, and she would give him whatever he asked for, which had made him self-willed. Also, she had told him from morning to night that he would one day be a king, and that kings were very happy, because everyone was bound to obey and respect them, and no one could prevent them from doing just as they liked. When the prince grew old enough to understand, he soon learned that there could be nothing worse than to be proud, obstinate, and conceited, and he had really tried to cure himself of these defects. But by that time all his faults had become habits, and a bad habit is very hard to get rid of. Not that he was naturally of a bad disposition. He was truly sorry when he had been naughty, and said, "I am very unhappy to have to struggle against my anger and pride every day. If I had been punished for them when I was little, they would not be such a trouble to me now." His ring pricked him very often, and sometimes he left off what he was doing at once, but at other times he would not attend to it. Strangely enough, it gave him only a slight prick for a trifling fault, but when he was really naughty it made his finger actually bleed. At last he got tired of being constantly reminded, and wanted to be able to do as he liked, so he threw his ring aside, and thought himself the happiest of men to have got rid of its teasing pricks. He gave himself up to doing every foolish thing that occurred to him, until he became quite wicked, and nobody could like him any longer. One day, when the prince was walking about, he saw a young girl who was so very pretty that he made up his mind at once that he would marry her. Her name was Celia, and she was as good as she was beautiful. Prince Darling fancied that Celia would think herself only too happy if he offered to make her a great queen, but she said fearlessly, "Sire, I am only a shepherdess, and a poor girl, but, nevertheless, I will not marry you." "Do you dislike me?" asked the prince, who was very much vexed at this answer. "No, my prince," replied Celia, "I cannot help thinking you very handsome. But what good would riches be to me, and all the grand dresses and splendid carriages that you would give me, if the bad deeds which I should see you do every day made me hate and despise you?" The prince was very angry at this speech, and commanded his officers to make Celia a prisoner and carry her off to his palace. All day long the remembrance of what she had said annoyed him, but as he loved her, he could not make up his mind to have her punished. One of the prince's favourite companions was his foster brother, whom he trusted entirely. But he was not at all a good man, and gave Prince Darling very bad advice, and encouraged him in all his evil ways. When he saw the prince so downcast, he asked what was the matter, and when he explained that he could not bear Celia's bad opinion of him, and was resolved to be a better man in order to please her, this evil adviser said to him, "You are very kind to trouble yourself about this little girl. If I were you, I would soon make her obey me. Remember that you are a king, and that it would be laughable to see you trying to please a shepherdess, who ought to be only too glad to be one of your slaves. Keep her in prison, and feed her on bread and water for a little while, and then, if she still says she will not marry you, have her head cut off, to teach other people that you mean to be obeyed. Why, if you cannot make a girl like that do as you wish, your subjects will soon forget that they are only put into this world for our pleasure." "But," said Prince Darling, "would it not be a shame if I had an innocent girl put to death? For Celia has done nothing to deserve punishment." "If people will not do as you tell them, they ought to suffer for it," answered his foster brother. "But even if it were unjust, you had better be accused of that by your subjects, than that they should find out that they may insult and thwart you as often as they please." In saying this, he was touching a weak point in his brother's character, for the prince's fear of losing any of his power made him at once abandon his first idea of trying to be good, and resolve to try and frighten the shepherdess into consenting to marry him. His foster brother, who wanted him to keep this resolution, invited 3 young courtiers, as wicked as himself, to sup with the prince, and they persuaded him to drink a great deal of wine, and continued to excite his anger against Celia by telling him that she had laughed at his love for her, until at last, in quite a furious rage, he rushed off to find her, declaring that if she still refused to marry him, she should be sold as a slave the very next day. But when he reached the room in which Celia had been locked up, he was greatly surprised to find that she was not in it, though he had the key in his own pocket all the time. His anger was terrible, and he vowed vengeance against whoever had helped her to escape. His bad friends, when they heard him, resolved to turn his wrath upon an old nobleman who had formerly been his tutor, and who still dared sometimes to tell the prince of his faults, for he loved him as if he had been his own son. At first Prince Darling had thanked him, but after a time he grew impatient and thought it must be just mere love of fault, finding that made his old tutor blame him when everyone else was praising and flattering him. So he ordered him to retire from his court, though he still from time to time spoke of him as a worthy man whom he respected, even if he no longer loved him. His unworthy friends feared that he might some day take it into his head to recall his old tutor, so they thought they now had a good opportunity of getting him banished forever. They reported to the prince that Suleiman, for that was the tutor's name, had boasted of having helped Celia to escape, and they bribed 3 men to say that Suleiman himself had told them about it. The prince, in great anger, sent his foster brother with a number of soldiers to bring his tutor before him in chains, like a criminal. After giving this order, he went to his own room, but he had scarcely got into it when there was a clap of thunder which made the ground shake, and the fairy Truth appeared suddenly before him. "I promised your father," said she sternly, "to give you good advice, and to punish you if you refuse to follow it. You have despised my counsel, and have gone your own evil way until you are only outwardly a man. Really, you are a monster, the horror of everyone who knows you. It is time that I should fulfill my promise and begin your punishment. I condemn you to resemble the animals whose ways you have imitated. You have made yourself like the lion by your anger, and like the wolf by your greediness. Like a snake, you have ungratefully turned upon one who was a second father to you. Your churlishness has made you like a bull. Therefore, in your new form, take the appearance of all these animals." The fairy had scarcely finished speaking when Prince Darling saw to his horror that her words were fulfilled. He had a lion's head, a bull's horns, a wolf's feet, and a snake's body. At the same instant he found himself in a great forest beside a clear lake, in which he could see plainly the horrible creature he had become, and a voice said to him, "Look carefully at the state to which your wickedness has brought you. Believe me, your soul is 1,000 times more hideous than your body." Prince Darling recognized the voice of the fairy Truth and turned in a fury to catch her and eat her up if he possibly could. But he saw no one, and the same voice went on, "I laugh at your powerlessness and anger, and I intend to punish your pride by letting you fall into the hands of your own subjects." The prince began to think that the best thing he could do would be to get as far away from the lake as he could. Then at least he would not be continually reminded of his terrible ugliness. So he ran toward the wood, but before he had gone many yards he fell into a deep pit which had been made to trap bears, and the hunters, who were hiding in a tree, leaped down and secured him with several chains and led him into the chief city of his own kingdom. On the way, instead of recognizing that his own faults had brought this punishment upon him, he accused the fairy of being the cause of all his misfortunes, and bit and tore at his chains furiously. As they approached the town, he saw that some great rejoicing was being held, and when the hunters asked what had happened, they were told that the prince, whose only pleasure it was to torment his people, had been found in his room, killed by a thunderbolt, for that was what was supposed to have become of him. 4 of his courtiers, those who had encouraged him in his wicked doings, had tried to seize the kingdom and divide it between them. But the people, who knew it was their bad counsels which had so changed the prince, had cut off their heads, and had offered the crown to Suleiman, whom the prince had left in prison. This noble lord had just been crowned, and the deliverance of the kingdom was the cause of the rejoicing. "For," they said, "he is a good and just man, and we shall once more enjoy peace and prosperity." Prince Darling roared with anger when he heard this, but it was still worse for him when he reached the great square before his own palace. He saw Suleiman seated upon a magnificent throne, and all the people crowded round, wishing him a long life that he might undo all the mischief done by his predecessor. Presently Suleiman made a sign with his hand that the people should be silent, and said, "I have accepted the crown you have offered me, but only that I may keep it for Prince Darling, who is not dead as you suppose. The fairy has assured me that there is still hope that you may some day see him again, good and virtuous as he was when he first came to the throne. Alas," he continued, "he was led away by flatterers. I knew his heart, and am certain that if it had not been for the bad influence of those who surrounded him, he would have been a good king and a father to his people. We may hate his faults, but let us pity him and hope for his restoration. As for me, I would die gladly if that could bring back our prince to reign justly and worthily once more." These words went to Prince Darling's heart. He realized the true affection and faithfulness of his old tutor, and for the first time reproached himself for all his evil deeds. At the same instant he felt all his anger melting away, and he began quickly to think over his past life, and to admit that his punishment was not more than he had deserved. He left off tearing at the iron bars of the cage in which he was shut up, and became as gentle as a lamb. The hunters who had caught him took him to a great menagerie, where he was chained up among all the other wild beasts, and he determined to show his sorrow for his past bad behavior by being gentle and obedient to the man who had to take care of him. Unfortunately, this man was very rough and unkind, and though the poor monster was quite quiet, he often beat him without rhyme or reason when he happened to be in a bad temper. One day, when this keeper was asleep, a tiger broke its chain and flew at him to eat him up. Prince Darling, who saw what was going on, at first felt quite pleased to think that he should be delivered from his persecutor, but soon thought better of it and wished that he were free. "I would return good for evil," he said to himself, "and save the unhappy man's life." He had hardly wished this when his iron cage flew open, and he rushed to the side of the keeper, who was awake and was defending himself against the tiger. When he saw the monster had got out, he gave himself up for lost, but his fear was soon changed into joy, for the kind monster threw itself upon the tiger and very soon killed it, and then came and crouched at the feet of the man it had saved. Overcome with gratitude, the keeper stooped to caress the strange creature which had done him such a great service, but suddenly a voice said in his ear, "A good action should never go unrewarded." And at the same instant the monster disappeared, and he saw at his feet only a pretty little dog. Prince Darling, delighted by the change, frisked about the keeper, showing his joy in every way he could, and the man, taking him up in his arms, carried him to the king, to whom he told the whole story. The queen said she would like to have this wonderful little dog, and the prince would have been very happy in his new home if he could have forgotten that he was a man and a king. The queen petted and took care of him, but she was so afraid that he would get too fat that she consulted the court physician, who said that he was to be fed only upon bread and was not to have much even of that. So poor Prince Darling was terribly hungry all day long, but he was very patient about it. One day, when they gave him his little loaf for breakfast, he thought he would like to eat it out in the garden. So he took it up in his mouth and trotted away toward a brook that he knew of a long way from the palace. But he was surprised to find that the brook was gone, and where it had been stood a great house that seemed to be built of gold and precious stones. Numbers of people splendidly dressed were going into it, and sounds of music and dancing and feasting could be heard from the windows. But what seemed very strange was that those people who came out of the house were pale and thin, and their clothes were torn and hanging in rags about them. Some fell down dead as they came out before they had time to get away. Others crawled farther with great difficulty, while others again lay on the ground, fainting with hunger, and begged a morsel of bread from those who were going into the house, but they would not so much as look at the poor creatures. Prince Darling went up to a young girl who was trying to eat a few blades of grass. She was so hungry. Touched with compassion, he said to himself, "I am very hungry, but I shall not die of starvation before I get my dinner. If I give my breakfast to this poor creature, perhaps I may save her life." So he laid his piece of bread in the girl's hand, and saw her eat it up eagerly. She soon seemed to be quite well again, and the prince, delighted to have been able to help her, was thinking of going home to the palace, when he heard a great outcry, and, turning round, saw Celia, who was being carried against her will into the great house. For the first time, the prince regretted that he was no longer the monster. Then he would have been able to rescue Celia. Now he could only bark feebly at the people who were carrying her off and try to follow them, but they chased and kicked him away. He determined not to quit the place till he knew what had become of Celia, and blamed himself for what had befallen her. "Alas," he said to himself, "I am furious with the people who are carrying Celia off. But isn't that exactly what I did myself? And if I had not been prevented, did I not intend to be still more cruel to her?" Here he was interrupted by a noise above his head. Someone was opening a window, and he saw with delight that it was Celia herself, who came forward and threw out a plate of most delicious-looking food. Then the window was shut again, and Prince Darling, who had not had anything to eat all day, thought he might as well take the opportunity of getting something. He ran forward to begin, but the young girl to whom he had given his bread gave a cry of terror and took him up in her arms, saying, "Don't touch it." My poor little dog, that house is the palace of pleasure, and everything that comes out of it is poisoned." At the same moment a voice said, "You see, a good action always brings its reward." And the prince found himself changed into a beautiful white dove. He remembered that white was the favorite color of the fairy Truth, and began to hope that he might at last win back her favor. But just now his first care was for Celia, and rising into the air he flew round and round the house until he saw an open window. But he searched through every room in vain. No trace of Celia was to be seen, and the prince, in despair, determined to search through the world till he found her. He flew on and on for several days, till he came to a great desert, where he saw a cavern, and, to his delight, there sat Celia, sharing the simple breakfast of an old hermit. Overjoyed to have found her, Prince Darling perched upon her shoulder, trying to express by his caresses how glad he was to see her again. And Celia, surprised and delighted by the tameness of this pretty white dove, stroked it softly and said, though she never thought of its understanding her, "I accept the gift that you make me of yourself, and I will love you always." "Take care what you are saying, Celia," said the old hermit. "Are you prepared to keep that promise?" "Indeed, I hope so, my sweet shepherdess," cried the prince, who was at that moment restored to his natural shape. "You promised to love me always. Tell me that you really mean what you said, or I shall have to ask the fairy to give me back the form of the dove which pleased you so much." "You need not be afraid that she will change her mind," said the fairy, throwing off the hermit's robe in which she had been disguised and appearing before them. "Celia has loved you ever since she first saw you, only she would not tell you while you were so obstinate and naughty. Now you have repented and mean to be good. You deserve to be happy, and so she may love you as much as she likes." Celia and Prince Darling threw themselves at the fairy's feet, and the prince was never tired of thanking her for her kindness. Celia was delighted to hear how sorry he was for all his past follies and misdeeds, and promised to love him as long as she lived. "Rise, my children," said the fairy, "and I will transport you to the palace, and Prince Darling shall have back again the crown he forfeited by his bad behavior." While she was speaking, they found themselves in Suliman's hall, and his delight was great at seeing his dear master once more. He gave up the throne joyfully to the prince, and remained always the most faithful of his subjects. Celia and Prince Darling reigned for many years, but he was so determined to govern worthily and to do his duty that his ring, which he took to wearing again, never once pricked him severely. Puss in Boots. There was a miller who left no more estate to the 3 sons he had than his mill, his ass, and his cat. The partition was soon made. Neither scrivener nor attorney was sent for. They would soon have eaten up all the poor patrimony. The eldest had the mill, the second the ass, and the youngest nothing but the cat. The poor young fellow was quite comfortless at having so poor a lot. "My brothers," said he, "may get their living handsomely enough by joining their stocks together. But for my part, when I have eaten up my cat and made me a muff of his skin, I must die of hunger." The cat, who heard all this but made as if he did not, said to him with a grave and serious air, "Do not thus afflict yourself, my good master. You have nothing else to do but to give me a bag and get a pair of boots made for me, that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, and you shall see that you have not so bad a portion in me as you imagine." The cat's master did not build very much upon what he said. He had often seen him play a great many cunning tricks to catch rats and mice, as when he used to hang by the heels, or hide himself in the meal, and make as if he were dead. so that he did not altogether despair of his affording him some help in his miserable condition. When the cat had what he asked for, he booted himself very gallantly, and putting his bag about his neck, he held the strings of it in his 2 forepaws, and went into a warren where was great abundance of rabbits. He put bran and sow thistle into his bag, and stretching out at length, as if he had been dead, he waited for some young rabbits, not yet acquainted with the deceits of the world, to come and rummage his bag for what he had put into it. Scarce was he lain down, but he had what he wanted. A rash and foolish young rabbit jumped into his bag, and Monsieur Puss, immediately drawing close the strings, took and killed him without pity. Proud of his prey, he went with it to the palace and asked to speak with his Majesty. He was shown upstairs into the king's apartment, and, making a low reverence, said to him, "I have brought you, sir, a rabbit of the warren, which my noble lord, the Marquis of Carabas, for that was the title which Puss was pleased to give his master, has commanded me to present to your Majesty from him." "Tell thy master," said the king, "that I thank him, and that he does me a great deal of pleasure." Another time he went and hid himself among some standing corn, holding still his bag open, and when a brace of partridges ran into it, he drew the strings, and so caught them both. He went and made a present of these to the king, as he had done before, of the rabbit which he took in the warren. The king, in like manner, received the partridges with great pleasure, and ordered him some money for drink. The cat continued for 2 or 3 months thus to carry his Majesty, from time to time, game of his master's taking. One day in particular, when he knew for certain that he was to take the air along the riverside with his daughter, the most beautiful princess in the world, he said to his master, "If you will follow my advice, your fortune is made. You have nothing else to do but go and wash yourself in the river. In that part I shall show you, and leave the rest to me." The Marquis of Carabas did what the cat advised him to, without knowing why or wherefore. While he was washing, the king passed by, and the cat began to cry out, "Help! Help! My Lord Marquis of Carabas is going to be drowned." At this noise, the king put his head out of the coach window, and, finding it was the cat who had so often brought him such good game, he commanded his guards to run immediately to the assistance of his lordship the Marquis of Carabas. While they were drawing the poor Marquis out of the river, the cat came up to the coach and told the king that, while his master was washing, there came by some rogues who went off with his clothes, though he had cried out, "Thieves! Thieves!" several times, as loud as he could. This cunning cat had hidden them under a great stone. The king immediately commanded the officers of his wardrobe to run and fetch one of his best suits for the Lord Marquis of Carabas. The king caressed him after a very extraordinary manner, and as the fine clothes he had given him extremely set off his good mien, for he was well made and very handsome in his person, the king's daughter took a secret inclination to him, and the Marquis of Carabas had no sooner cast 2 or 3 respectful and somewhat tender glances, but she fell in love with him to distraction. The king would needs have him come into the coach and take part of the airing. The cat, quite overjoyed to see his project begin to succeed, marched on before, and, meeting with some countrymen who were mowing a meadow, he said to them, "Good people, you who are mowing, if you do not tell the king that the meadow you mow belongs to my Lord Marquis of Carabas, you shall be chopped as small as herbs for the pot." The king did not fail asking of the mowers to whom the meadow they were mowing belonged. "To my Lord Marquis of Carabas," answered they all together, for the cat's threats had made them terribly afraid. "You see, sir," said the Marquis, This is a meadow which never fails to yield a plentiful harvest every year. The master cat, who went still on before, met with some reapers and said to them, "Good people, you who are reaping, if you do not tell the king that all this corn belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, you shall be chopped as small as herbs for the pot." The king, who passed by a moment after, would needs know to whom all that corn, which he then saw, did belong. "To my lord Marquis of Carabas," replied the reapers, and the king was very well pleased with it, as well as the marquis, whom he congratulated thereupon. The master cat, who went always before, said the same words to all he met, and the king was astonished at the vast estates of my lord Marquis of Carabas. Monsieur Puss came at last to a stately castle, the master of which was an ogre, the richest had ever been known, for all the lands which the king had then gone over belonged to this castle. The cat, who had taken care to inform himself who this ogre was and what he could do, asked to speak with him, saying he could not pass so near his castle without having the honour of paying his respects to him. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do, and made him sit down. "I have been assured," said the cat, "that you have the gift of being able to change yourself into all sorts of creatures you have a mind to. You can, for example, transform yourself into a lion or elephant, and the like." "That is true," answered the ogre very briskly, "and to convince you, you shall see me now become a lion." Puss was so sadly terrified at the sight of a lion so near him that he immediately got into the gutter, not without abundance of trouble and danger, because of his boots, which were of no use at all to him in walking upon the tiles. A little while after, when Puss saw that the ogre had resumed his natural form, he came down, and owned he had been very much frightened. "I have been, moreover, informed," said the cat, "but I know not how to believe it, that you have also the power to take on you the shape of the smallest animals, for example, to change yourself into a rat or a mouse. But I must own to you, I take this to be impossible." "Impossible!" cried the ogre. "You shall see that presently." And at the same time he changed himself into a mouse, and began to run about the floor. Puss no sooner perceived this, but he fell upon him and ate him up. Meanwhile the king, who saw, as he passed, this fine castle of the ogres, had a mind to go into it. Puss, who heard the noise of his Majesty's coach running over the drawbridge, ran out and said to the king, "Your Majesty is welcome to this castle of my Lord Marquis of Carabas." "What, my Lord Marquis?" cried the king. "And does this castle also belong to you? There can be nothing finer than this court, and all the stately buildings which surround it. Let us go into it, if you please." The marquis gave his hand to the princess, and followed the king, who went first. They passed into a spacious hall, where they found a magnificent collation, which the ogre had prepared for his friends, who were that very day to visit him, but dared not to enter, knowing the king was there. His Majesty was perfectly charmed with the good qualities of my Lord Marquis of Carabas, as was his daughter, who had fallen violently in love with him, and, seeing the vast estate he possessed, said to him, after having drunk 5 or 6 glasses, "It will be owing to yourself only, my Lord Marquis, if you are not my son-in-law." The Marquis, making several low bows, accepted the honour which his Majesty conferred upon him, and forthwith, that very same day, married the princess. Puss became a great lord, and never ran after mice any more, but only for his diversion. Rummpelstiltskin. There was once upon a time a poor miller who had a very beautiful daughter. Now it happened one day that he had an audience with the king, and in order to appear a person of some importance, he told him that he had a daughter who could spin straw into gold. "Now that's a talent worth having," said the king to the miller. "If your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her to my palace tomorrow, and I'll put her to the test." When the girl was brought to him, he led her into a room full of straw, gave her a spinning wheel and spindle, and said, "Now set to work and spin all night till early dawn, and if by that time you haven't spun the straw into gold, you shall die." Then he closed the door behind him and left her alone inside. So the poor miller's daughter sat down and didn't know what in the world she was to do. She hadn't the least idea of how to spin straw into gold, and became at last so miserable that she began to cry. Suddenly the door opened, and in stepped a tiny little man and said, "Good evening, Miss Miller Maid. Why are you crying so bitterly?" "Oh," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and haven't a notion how it's done." "What will you give me if I spin it for you?" asked the mannikin. "My necklace," replied the girl. The little man took the necklace, sat himself down at the wheel, and whir, whir, whir. The wheel went round 3 times, and the bobbin was full. Then he put on another, and whir, whir, whir. The wheel went round 3 times, and the second too was full. And so it went on till the morning, when all the straw was spun away, and all the bobbins were full of gold. As soon as the sun rose, the king came, and when he perceived the gold he was astonished and delighted, but his heart only lusted more than ever after the precious metal. He had the miller's daughter put into another room full of straw, much bigger than the first, and bade her, if she valued her life, spin it all into gold before the following morning. The girl didn't know what to do, and began to cry. Then the door opened as before, and the tiny little man appeared and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw into gold for you?" "The ring from my finger," answered the girl. The mannikin took the ring, and whir! Round went the spinning wheel again, and when morning broke he had spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king was pleased beyond measure at the sights, but his greed for gold was still not satisfied, and he had the miller's daughter brought into a yet bigger room full of straw, and said, "You must spin all this away in the night, but if you succeed this time, you shall become my wife. She's only a miller's daughter, it's true," he thought, "but I couldn't find a richer wife if I were to search the whole world over." When the girl was alone, the little man appeared for the 3rd time, and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw for you once again?" "I've nothing more to give," answered the girl. "Then promise me when you are queen to give me your first child." "Who knows what may not happen before that?" thought the miller's daughter. And besides, she saw no other way out of it. So she promised the mannikin what he demanded, and he set to work once more and spun the straw into gold. When the king came in the morning and found everything as he had desired, he straightway made her his wife, and the miller's daughter became a queen. When a year had passed, a beautiful son was born to her, and she thought no more of the little man, till all of a sudden one day he stepped into her room and said, "Now give me what you promised." The queen was in a great state, and offered the little man all the riches in her kingdom if he would only leave her the child. But the mannikin said, "No, a living creature is dearer to me than all the treasures in the world." Then the queen began to cry and sob so bitterly that the little man was sorry for her, and said, "I'll give you 3 days to guess my name, and if you find it out in that time, you may keep your child." Then the queen pondered the whole night over all the names she had ever heard, and sent a messenger to scour the land, and to pick up far and near any names he could come across. When the little man arrived on the following day, she began with Casper, Melchior, Belshazzar, and all the other names she knew in a string. But at each one the mannikin called out, That's not my name." The next day she sent to inquire the names of all the people in the neighbourhood, and had a long list of the most uncommon and extraordinary for the little man when he made his appearance. "Is your name, perhaps, Sheepshanks, Crookshanks, Spindleshanks?" But he always replied, "That's not my name." On the third day the messenger returned and announced, "I have not been able to find any new names, but as I came upon a high hill round the corner of the wood, where the foxes and hares bid each other good night, I saw a little house, and in front of the house burned a fire, and round the fire sprang the most grotesque little man, hopping on one leg and crying, 'Tomorrow I brew, today I bake, and then the child away I'll take. For little deems my royal dame that Rummpelstiltskin is my name.'" You can imagine the queen's delight at hearing the name, and when the little man stepped in shortly afterward and asked, "Now, my lady queen, what's my name?" she asked first, "Is your name Conrad?" "No." "Is your name Harry?" "No." "Is your name perhaps Rumpelstiltskin?" "Some demon has told you that, some demon has told you that," screamed the little man, and in his rage drove his right foot so far into the ground that it sank in up to his waist. Then, in a passion, he seized the left foot with both hands and tore himself in two. Snow, White and Rose. Red, a poor widow, once lived in a little cottage with a garden in front of it, in which grew 2 rose trees, one bearing white roses and the other red. She had 2 children who were just like the 2 rose trees. One was called Snow White and the other Rose Red. And they were the sweetest and best children in the world, always diligent and always cheerful. But Snow White was quieter and more gentle than Rose Red. Rose Red loved to run about the fields and meadows, and to pick flowers and catch butterflies. But Snow White sat at home with her mother and helped her in the household, or read aloud to her when there was no work to do. The 2 children loved each other so dearly that they always walked about hand in hand whenever they went out together, and when Snow White said, "We will never desert each other," Rose Red answered, "No, not as long as we live." And the mother added, "Whatever one gets, she shall share with the other." They often roamed about in the woods gathering berries, and no beast offered to hurt them. On the contrary, they came up to them in the most confiding manner. The little hare would eat a cabbage leaf from their hands. The deer grazed beside them. The stag would bound past them merrily. And the birds remained on the branches and sang to them with all their might. No evil ever befell them. If they tarried late in the wood and night overtook them, they lay down together on the moss and slept till morning, and their mother knew they were quite safe, and never felt anxious about them. Once, when they had slept all night in the wood and had been wakened by the morning sun, they perceived a beautiful child in a shining white robe sitting close to their resting place. The figure got up, looked at them kindly, but said nothing, and vanished into the wood. And when they looked round about them, they became aware that they had slept quite close to a precipice, over which they would certainly have fallen had they gone on a few steps further in the darkness. And when they told their mother of their adventure, she said what they had seen must have been the angel that guards good children. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's cottage so beautifully clean and neat that it was a pleasure to go into it. In summer, Rose Red looked after the house, and every morning before her mother awoke, she placed a bunch of flowers before the bed, from each tree a rose. In winter, Snow White lit the fire and put on the kettle, which was made of brass, but so beautifully polished that it shone like gold. In the evening, when the snowflakes fell, their mother said, "Snow White, go and close the shutters." And they drew round the fire, while the mother put on her spectacles and read aloud from a big book, and the 2 girls listened and sat and span. Beside them on the ground lay a little lamb, and behind them perched a little white dove with its head tucked under its wings. One evening, as they sat thus cosily together, someone knocked at the door as though he desired admittance. The mother said, "Rose, Red, open the door quickly. It must be some traveller seeking shelter." Rose Red hastened to unbar the door, and thought she saw a poor man standing in the darkness outside. But it was no such thing, only a bear who poked his thick black head through the door. Rose Red screamed aloud and sprang back in terror. The lamb began to bleat, the dove flapped its wings, and Snow White ran and hid behind her mother's bed. But the bear began to speak and said, "Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you. I am half frozen, and only wish to warm myself a little." "My poor bear," said the mother, "lie down by the fire, only take care you don't burn your fur." Then she called out, "Snow White and Rose, Red, come out, the bear will do you no harm, he is a good, honest creature." So they both came out of their hiding places, and gradually the lamb and dove drew near too, and they all forgot their fear. The bear asked the children to beat the snow a little out of his fur, and they fetched a brush and scrubbed him till he was dry. Then the beast stretched himself in front of the fire and growled quite happily and comfortably. The children soon grew quite at their ease with him, and led their helpless guest a fearful life. They tugged his fur with their hands, put their small feet on his back, and rolled him about here and there, or took a hazel wand and beat him with it. And if he growled, they only laughed. The bear submitted to everything with the best possible good nature. Only when they went too far, he cried, "Oh, children, spare my life!" Snow White and Rose Red, don't beat your lover dead. When it was time to retire for the night, and the others went to bed, the mother said to the bear, "You can lie there on the hearth, in heaven's name. It will be shelter for you from the cold and wet." As soon as day dawned, the children led him out, and he trotted over the snow into the wood. From this time on, the bear came every evening at the same hour, and lay down by the hearth, and let the children play what pranks they liked with him. And they got so accustomed to him that the door was never shut till their black friend had made his appearance. When spring came, and all outside was green, the bear said one morning to Snow White, "Now I must go away, and not return again the whole summer." "Where are you going to, dear bear?" asked Snow White. "I must go to the wood and protect my treasure from the wicked dwarfs. In winter, when the earth is frozen hard, they are obliged to remain underground, for they can't work their way through. But now, when the sun has thawed and warmed the ground, they break through and come up above to spy the land and steal what they can. What once falls into their hands and into their caves is not easily brought back to light." Snow White was quite sad over their friend's departure, and when she unbarred the door for him, the bear, stepping out, caught a piece of his fur in the door-knocker, and Snow White thought she caught sight of glittering gold beneath it. But she couldn't be certain of it, and the bear ran hastily away, and soon disappeared behind the trees. A short time after this, the mother sent the children into the wood to collect faggots. They came in their wanderings upon a big tree which lay felled on the ground, and on the trunk among the long grass they noticed something jumping up and down, but what it was they couldn't distinguish. When they approached nearer, they perceived a dwarf with a wizened face and a beard, a yard long. The end of the beard was jammed into a cleft of the tree, and the little man sprang about like a dog on a chain, and didn't seem to know what he was to do. He glared at the girls with his fiery red eyes, and screamed out, "What are you standing there for? Can't you come and help me?" "What were you doing, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You stupid, inquisitive goose," replied the dwarf. "I wanted to split the tree, in order to get little chips of wood for our kitchen fire. Those thick logs that serve to make fires, for course. Greedy people like yourselves quite burn up all the little food we need. I had successfully driven in the wedge, and all was going well. But the cursed wood was so slippery that it suddenly sprang out, and the tree closed up so rapidly that I had no time to take my beautiful white beard out. So here I am stuck fast, and I can't get away. And you silly, smooth-faced milk and water girls just stand and laugh. Ugh, what wretches you are! The children did all in their power, but they couldn't get the beard out. It was wedged in far too firmly. "I will run and fetch somebody," said Rose Red. "Crazy blockheads," snapped the dwarf. "What's the good of calling anyone else? You're already too many for me. Does nothing better occur to you than that?" "Don't be so impatient," said Snow White. "I'll see you get help." And taking her scissors out of her pocket, she cut off the end of his beard. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he seized a bag full of gold, which was hidden among the roots of the tree, lifted it up, and muttered aloud, "Curse these rude wretches, cutting off a piece of my splendid beard." With these words he swung the bag over his back and disappeared without as much as looking at the children again. Shortly after this, Snow White and Rose Red went out to get a dish of fish. As they approached the stream, they saw something which looked like an enormous grasshopper springing toward the water, as if it were going to jump in. They ran forward and recognized their old friend the dwarf. "Where are you going to?" asked Rose Red. "You're surely not going to jump into the water?" "I'm not such a fool," screamed the dwarf. "Don't you see that cursed fish is trying to drag me in?" The little man had been sitting on the bank fishing, when unfortunately the wind had entangled his beard in the line, and when immediately afterward a big fish bit. The feeble little creature had no strength to pull it out. The fish had the upper fin, and dragged the dwarf toward him. He clung on with all his might to every rush and blade of grass, but it didn't help him much. He had to follow every movement of the fish, and was in great danger of being drawn into the water. The girls came up just at the right moment, held him firm, and did all they could to disentangle his beard from the line. But in vain. Beard and line were in a hopeless muddle. Nothing remained but to produce the scissors and cut the beard, by which a small part of it was sacrificed. When the dwarf perceived what they were about, he yelled to them, "Do you call that manners, you toadstools, to disfigure a fellow's face? It wasn't enough that you shortened my beard before, but you must now needs cut off the best bit of it. I can't appear like this before my own people. I wish you'd been in Jericho first." Then he fetched a sack of pearls that lay among the rushes, and without saying another word he dragged it away and disappeared behind a stone. It happened that soon after this the mother sent the two girls to the town to buy needles, thread, laces, and ribbons. Their road led over a heath where huge boulders of rock lay scattered here and there. While trudging along, they saw a big bird hovering in the air, circling slowly above them, but always descending lower, till at last it settled on a rock not far from them. Immediately afterward, they heard a sharp, piercing cry. They ran forward, and saw with horror that the eagle had pounced on their old friend the dwarf and was about to carry him off. The tender-hearted children seized hold of the little man, and struggled so long with the bird that at last he let go his prey. When the dwarf had recovered from the first shock, he screamed in his screeching voice, "Couldn't you have treated me more carefully? You have torn my thin little coat all to shreds. Useless, awkward hussies that you are." Then he took a bag of precious stones and vanished under the rocks into his cave. The girls were accustomed to his ingratitude, and went on their way and did their business in town. On their way home, as they were again passing the heath, they surprised the dwarf pouring out his precious stones on an open space, for he had thought no one would pass by at so late an hour. The evening sun shone on the glittering stones, and they glanced and gleamed so beautifully that the children stood still and gazed on them. "What are you standing there gaping for?" screamed the dwarf, and his ashen-grey face became scarlet with rage. He was about to go off with these angry words when a sudden growl was heard, and a black bear trotted out of the wood. The dwarf jumped up in great fright, but he hadn't time to reach his place of retreat, for the bear was already close to him. Then he cried in terror, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare me. I'll give you all my treasure. Look at those beautiful precious stones lying there. Spare my life. What pleasure would you get from a poor feeble little fellow like me? You won't feel me between your teeth. There, lay hold of these two wicked girls. They will be a tender morsel for you, as fat as young quails. Eat them up, for heaven's sake." But the bear, paying no attention to his words, gave the evil little creature one blow with his paw, and he never moved again. The girls had run away, but the bear called after them, "Snow White and Rose, Red, don't be afraid. Wait, and I'll come with you." Then they recognized his voice and stood still, and when the bear was quite close to them, his skin suddenly fell off, and a beautiful man stood beside them, all dressed in gold. "I am a king's son," he said, "and have been doomed by that unholy little dwarf who had stolen my treasure, to roam about the woods as a wild bear till his death should set me free. Now he has got his well-merited punishment." Snow White married him, and Rose Red his brother, and they divided the great treasure the dwarf had collected in his cave between them. The old mother lived for many years peacefully with her children, and she carried the two rose trees with her, and they stood in front of her window, and every year they bore the finest red and white roses. The Black Bull of Noroway, and many a hunting song they sung, and song of game and glee, then tuned to plaintive strains their tongue of Scotland's Louvre and Lee. To wilder measures next they turn, the black bull of Noroway. Sudden the tapers ceased to burn, the minstrels ceased to play. In Noroway, lang syne, there lived a certain lady, and she had 3 doctors. The oldest of them said to her mither, "Mither, bake me a bannock and roast me a collop, for I'm gone ower to seek my fortune." Her mither did say, and the doctor gaed awa to an old witch washerwife and telled her purpose. The old wife bade her stay that day, and gang and look out o' her back door and see what she could see. She saw nocht the first day. The second day she did the same, and saw nocht. On the third day she looked again, and saw a coach and 6 coming along the road. She ran in and told the old wife what she saw. "Oh, weel," quo the old wife, "yon's for you. Say." They took her into the coach and galloped off. The second doctor next says to her mither, "Mither, bake me a bannock and roast me a collop, for I'm gone awa to seek my fortune." Her mither did say, and awa she gaed to the old wife as her sister had dune. On the third day she looked out at the back door and saw a coach and 4 coming along the road. "Eh weel," quo the old wife, "yon's for you. Say ye." They took her in, and aff they set. The third doctor says to her mither, "Mither, bake me a bannock and roast me a collop, for I'm gone awa to seek my fortune." Her mither did say, and awa she gaed to the old witch wife. She bade her look out of her back door and see what she could see. She did say, and when she came back said she saw nocht. The second day she did the same, and saw nocht. The third day she looked again, and on coming back said to the old wife she saw nocht but a muckle. Black Bull coming roaring alang the road. "Oh, weel," quo the old wife, "yon's for you." On hearing this, she was next to distracted with grief and terror, but she was lifted up and set on his back, and they went. Aye. They travelled, and on they travelled, till the lady grew faint with hunger. "Eat out of my right lug," says the Black Bull, "and drink out of my left lug, and set by your leavings." "Say," she did as he said, and was wonderfully refreshed. And lang they gaed, and sair they rade, till they came in sight of a very big and bonny castle. "Yonder we maun be this night," quo the Bull, "for my old brither lives yonder." And presently they were at the place. They lifted her off his back, and took her in, and sent him away to a park for the night. In the morning, when they brought the Bull hame, they took the lady into a fine shining parlour, and gave her a beautiful apple, telling her no to break it till she was in the greatest strait ever mortal was in the world, and that wad bring her out. Again she was lifted on the Bull's back, and after she had ridden far, and fairer than I can tell, they came in sight of a far bonnier castle, and far farther awa than the last, says the Bull till her. "Yonder we maun be the night, for my second brither lives yonder." And they were at the place directly. They lifted her down, and took her in, and sent the Bull to the field for the night. In the morning they took the lady into a fine and rich room, and gave her the finest pear she had ever seen, bidding her no to break it till she was in the greatest strait ever mortal could be in, and that wad get her out o't. Again she was lifted and set on his back, and ower they went, and lang they gaed and sair they rade, till they came in sight of the far biggest castle and far farthest off they had yet seen. "We maun be yonder the night," says the Bull, "for my young brither lives yonder." And they were there directly. They lifted her down, took her in, and sent the Bull to the field for the night. In the morning they took her into a room, the finest of her, and guyed her a plum, telling her no to break it till she was in the greatest strait mortal could be in, and that wad get her out. Presently they brought hame the Bull, set the lady on his back, and awa they went, and aye they gaed, and on they rade, till they came to a dark and ugsome glen, where they stopped, and the lady lighted down. Says the Bull to her, "Here ye maun stay till I gang and fight the dale. Ye maun seat yourselves on that stane, and move neither hand nor fit till I come back, else I'll never find ye again. And if everything round about ye turns blue, he beated the dale, but should a things turn red, he conquered me." She set herself down on the stane, and by around her turned blue. O'ercome with joy, she lifted the eye fit and crossed it o'er the either, sae glad was she that her companion was victorious. The Bull returned and sought for, but never could find her. Lang she sat, and aye she grat, till she wearied. At last she rase and gaed awa, she kedna wha till. On she wandered till she came to a great hill o' glass, that she could to climb, but wasna able. Round the bottom of the hill she gaed, sabbing and seeking a passage o'er, till at last she came to a smith's house, and the smith promised, if she wad serve him 7 years, he wad make her iron shoon. Whereway she could climb o'er the glassy hill. At 7 years' end she got her iron shoon, clamb the glassy hill, and chanced to come to the old washerwife's habitation. There she was told of a gallant young knight that had given in some bluidy sarks to wash, and wherever washed thy sarks was to be his wife. The old wife had washed till she was tired, and then she set to her doctor, and baith washed, and they better washed, in hopes of getting the young knight, but they couldn't bring out a stain. At length they set the stranger damozel to walk, and whenever she began, the stains came out pure and clean. But the old wife made the knight believe it was her doctor had washed the sarks. So the knight and the eldest doctor were to be married, and the stranger damosel was distracted at the thought of it, for she was deeply in love with him. So she bethought her of her apple, and breaking it, found it filled with gold and precious jewelry, the richest she had ever seen. "All these," she said to the eldest doctor, "I will give you, on condition that you put off your marriage for a day and allow me to go into his room alone at night." So the lady consented. But meanwhile the old wife had prepared a sleeping drink and given it to the knight. War drank it and never wakened till next morning. The lee-lang night, the damosel sobbed and sang, "7 lang years I served for thee, the glassy hill I clamb for thee, the bluidy shirt I rang for thee, and wilt thou no walken and turn to me?" Next day she kentna what to do for grief. She then brake the pear, and found it filled with jewellery far richer than the contents of the apple. "Wish thy jewels," she bargained for permission to be a second night in the young knight's chamber. But the old wife guyed him anither sleeping drink, and he again sleeped till morning. A night she kept sighing and singing as before, "7 lang years I served for thee," see. Still he sleeped, and she nearly lost hope at thegither. But that day, when he was out at the hunting, somebody asked him what noise and moaning was yon. They heard all last night in his bedchamber. He said he heardna, only noise. But they assured him there was say, and he resolved to keep waking that night to try what he could hear. That being the 3rd night, and the damosel being between hope and despair, she brake her plum, and it held far the richest jewellery of the 3. She bargained as before, and the old wife, as before, took in the sleeping drink to the young knight's chamber, but he told her he couldn't drink it that night without sweetening. And when she gaed awa for some honey to sweeten it with, he poured out the drink, and sae made the old wife think he had drunk it. They went to bed again, and the damosel began, as before, singing, "7 lang years I served for thee, the glassy hill I clamb for thee, the bluidy shirt I rang for thee, and wilt thou no walken and turn to me?" He heard and turned to her, and she telled him that had befallen her, and he telled her that had happened to him, and he caused the old washerwife and her doctor to be burned, and they were married, and he and she are living happy till this day, for aught I ken. The brave little tailor. One summer's day, a little tailor sat on his table by the window in the best of spirits, and sewed for dear life. As he was sitting thus, a peasant woman came down the street calling out, "Good jam to sell! Good jam to sell!" This sounded sweetly in the tailor's ears. He put his frail little head out of the window and shouted, "Up here, my good woman, and you find a willing customer." The woman climbed up the 3 flights of stairs with her heavy basket to the tailor's room, and he made her spread out all the pots in a row before him. He examined them all, lifted them up and smelled them, and said at last, "This jam seems good. Weigh me 4 ounces of it, my good woman, and even if it's 1/4 of a pound, I won't stick at it." The woman, who had hoped to find a good market, gave him what he wanted, but went away grumbling wrathfully. "Now heaven shall bless this jam for my use," cried the little tailor, "and it shall sustain and strengthen me." He fetched some bread out of a cupboard, cut a round off the loaf, and spread the jam on it. "That won't taste amiss," he said, "but I'll finish that waistcoat first before I take a bite." He placed the bread beside him, went on sewing, and out of the lightness of his heart kept on making his stitches bigger and bigger. In the meantime, the smell of the sweet jam rose to the ceiling, where heaps of flies were sitting, and attracted them to such an extent that they swarmed onto it in masses. "Ha! Who invited you?" said the tailor, and chased the unwelcome guests away. But the flies, who didn't understand English, refused to let themselves be warned off, and returned again in even greater numbers. At last the little tailor, losing all patience, reached out of his chimney corner for a duster and exclaiming, "Wait, and I'll give it to you." He beat them mercilessly with it. When he left off, he counted the slain, and no fewer than 7 lay dead before him with outstretched legs. "What a desperate fellow I am," said he, and was filled with admiration at his own courage. The whole town must know about this, and in great haste the little tailor cut out a girdle, hemmed it, and embroidered on it in big letters, 7 at a blow. "What did I say, the town?" "No, the whole world shall hear of it," he said, and his heart beat for joy as a lamb wags his tail. The tailor strapped the girdle round his waist and set out into the wide world, for he considered his workroom too small a field for his prowess. Before he set forth, he looked round about him to see if there was anything in the house he could take with him on his journey. But he found nothing except an old cheese which he took possession of. In front of the house he observed a bird that had been caught in some bushes, and this he put into his wallet beside the cheese. Then he went on his way merrily, and being light and agile he never felt tired. His way led up a hill, on the top of which sat a powerful giant, who was calmly surveying the landscape. The little tailor went up to him, and greeting him cheerfully said, "Good day, friend. There you sit at your ease, viewing the whole wide world. I'm just on my way there. What do you say to accompanying me?" The giant looked contemptuously at the tailor and said, "What a poor wretched little creature you are." "That's a good joke," answered the little tailor, and unbuttoning his coat, he showed the giant the girdle. "There now, you can read what sort of a fellow I am." The giant read, 7 at a blow, and thinking they were human beings the tailor had slain, he conceived a certain respect for the little man. But first he thought he'd test him, so taking up a stone in his hand, he squeezed it till some drops of water ran out. "Now you do the same," said the giant, "if you really wish to be thought strong." "Is that all?" said the little tailor. "That's child's play to me." So he dived into his wallet, brought out the cheese, and pressed it till the whey ran out. "My squeeze was in sooth better than yours," said he. The giant didn't know what to say, for he couldn't have believed it of the little fellow. To prove him again, the giant lifted a stone and threw it so high that the eye could hardly follow it. "Now, my little pygmy, let me see you do that." "Well thrown," said the tailor, "but after all your stone fell to the ground. I'll throw one that won't come down at all." He dived into his wallet again, and grasping the bird in his hand, he threw it up into the air. The bird, enchanted to be free, soared up into the sky, and flew away never to return. "Well, what do you think of that little piece of business, friend?" asked the tailor. "You can certainly throw," said the giant, "but now let's see if you can carry a proper weight." With these words he led the tailor to a huge oak tree which had been felled to the ground, and said, "If you are strong enough, help me to carry the tree out of the wood." "Most certainly," said the little tailor. "Just you take the trunk on your shoulder. I'll bear the top and branches, which is certainly the heaviest part." The giant laid the trunk on his shoulder, but the tailor sat at his ease among the branches, and the giant, who couldn't see what was going on behind him, had to carry the whole tree, and the little tailor into the bargain. There he sat behind, in the best of spirits, lustily whistling a tune, as if carrying the tree were mere sport. The giant, after dragging the heavy weight for some time, could get on no further, and shouted out, "Hi! I must let the tree fall." The tailor sprang nimbly down, seized the tree with both hands, as if he had carried it the whole way, and said to the giant, "Fancy a big lout like you not being able to carry a tree." They continued to go on their way together, and as they passed by a cherry tree, The giant grasped the top of it, where the ripest fruit hung, gave the branches into the tailor's hand, and bade him eat. But the little tailor was far too weak to hold the tree down, and when the giant let go, the tree swung back into the air, bearing the little tailor with it. When he had fallen to the ground again without hurting himself, the giant said, "What? Do you mean to tell me you haven't the strength to hold down a feeble twig?" "It wasn't strength that was wanting," replied the tailor. "Do you think that would have been anything for a man who has killed 7 at a blow? I jumped over the tree because the huntsmen are shooting among the branches near us. Do you do the like if you dare." The giant made an attempt, but couldn't get over the tree, and stuck fast in the branches, so that here too the little tailor had the better of him. "Well, you're a fine fellow after all," said the giant. "Come and spend the night with us in our cave." The little tailor willingly consented to do this, and following his friend, they went on till they reached a cave where several other giants were sitting round a fire, each holding a roast sheep in his hand, of which he was eating. The little tailor looked about him and thought, "Yes, there's certainly more room to turn round in here than in my workshop." The giant showed him a bed and bade him lie down and have a good sleep, but the bed was too big for the little tailor, so he didn't get into it, but crept away into the corner. At midnight, when the giant thought the little tailor was fast asleep, he rose up, and taking his big iron walking stick, he broke the bed in two with a blow, and thought he had made an end of the little grasshopper. At early dawn, the giants went off to the wood, and quite forgot about the little tailor, till all of a sudden they met him trudging along in the most cheerful manner. The giants were terrified at the apparition, and, fearful lest he should slay them, they all took to their heels as fast as they could. The little tailor continued to follow his nose, and after he had wandered about for a long time, he came to the courtyard of a royal palace, and feeling tired, he lay down on the grass and fell asleep. While he lay there, the people came, and looking him all over, read on his girdle, 7 at a blow. "Oh," they said, "what can this great hero of 100 fights want in our peaceful land? He must indeed be a mighty man of valor." They went and told the king about him, and said what a weighty and useful man he'd be in time of war, and that it would be well to secure him at any price. This counsel pleased the king, and he sent one of his courtiers down to the little tailor to offer him, when he awoke, a commission in their army. The messenger remained standing by the sleeper, and waited till he stretched his limbs and opened his eyes, when he tendered his proposal. "That's the very thing I came here for," he answered. "I am quite ready to enter the king's service." So he was received with all honor and given a special house of his own to live in. But the other officers resented the success of the little tailor and wished him 1,000 miles away. "What's to come of it all?" they asked each other. "If we quarrel with him, he'll let out at us, and at every blow 7 will fall. There'll soon be an end of us." So they resolved to go in a body to the king, and all to send in their papers. "We are not made," they said, "to hold out against a man who kills 7 at a blow." The king was grieved at the thought of losing all his faithful servants for the sake of one man, and he wished heartily that he had never set eyes on him, or that he could get rid of him. But he didn't dare to send him away, for he feared he might kill him along with his people and place himself on the throne. He pondered long and deeply over the matter, and finally came to a conclusion. He sent to the tailor and told him that, seeing what a great and warlike hero he was about to make him an offer. In a certain wood of his kingdom there dwelled 2 giants, who did much harm by the way. They robbed, murdered, burned, and plundered everything about them. No one could approach them without endangering his life. But if he could overcome and kill these 2 giants, he should have his only daughter for a wife. and half his kingdom into the bargain, he might have 100 horsemen too, to back him up. That's the very thing for a man like me, thought the little tailor. One doesn't get the offer of a beautiful princess and half a kingdom every day. Done with you, he answered. I'll soon put an end to the giants, but I haven't the smallest need of your 100 horsemen. A fellow who can slay 7 men at a blow need not be afraid of 2. The little tailor set out, and the 100 horsemen followed him. When he came to the outskirts of the wood, he said to his followers, "You wait here. I'll manage the giants by myself." And he went on into the wood, casting his sharp little eyes right and left about him. After a while, he spied the 2 giants lying asleep under a tree, and snoring till the very boughs bent with the breeze. The little tailor lost no time in filling his wallet with stones, and then climbed up the tree under which they lay. When he got to about the middle of it, he slipped along a branch till he sat just above the sleepers, when he threw down one stone after the other on the nearest giant. The giant felt nothing for a long time, but at last he woke up, and pinching his companion said, "What did you strike me for?" "I didn't strike you," said the other. "You must be dreaming." They both lay down to sleep again, and the tailor threw down a stone on the second giant, who sprang up and cried, "What's that for? Why did you throw something at me?" "I didn't throw anything," growled the first one. They wrangled on for a time, till, as both were tired, they made up the matter and fell asleep again. The little tailor began his game once more, and flung the largest stone he could find in his wallet with all his force, and hit the first giant on the chest. "This is too much of a good thing," he yelled, and springing up like a madman, he knocked his companion against the tree till he trembled. He gave, however, as good as he got, and they became so enraged that they tore up trees and beat each other with them till they both fell dead at once on the ground. Then the little tailor jumped down. "It's a mercy," he said, "that they didn't root up the tree on which I was perched, or I should have had to jump like a squirrel onto another, which, nimble though I am, would have been no easy job." He drew his sword and gave each of the giants a very fine thrust or 2 on the breast, and then went to the horsemen and said, "The deed is done. I've put an end to the 2 of them. But I assure you it has been no easy matter, for they even tore up trees in their struggle to defend themselves, but all that's of no use against one who slays 7 men at a blow." "Weren't you wounded?" asked the horseman. "No fear," answered the tailor. "They haven't touched a hair of my head." But the horsemen wouldn't believe him till they rode into the wood and found the giants weltering in their blood and the trees lying around torn up by the roots. The little tailor now demanded the promised reward from the king, but he repented his promise and pondered once more how he could rid himself of the hero. "Before you obtain the hand of my daughter and half my kingdom," he said to him, "you must do another deed of valor. A unicorn is running about loose in the wood and doing much mischief. You must first catch it. I'm even less afraid of one unicorn than of 2 giants, 7 at a blow. That's my motto." He took a piece of cord and an axe with him, went out to the wood, and again told the men who had been sent with him to remain outside. He hadn't to search long, for the unicorn soon passed by, and, on perceiving the tailor, dashed straight at him as though it were going to spike him on the spot. "Gently, gently," said he, "not so fast, my friend." And standing still, he waited till the beast was quite near, when he sprang lightly behind a tree. The unicorn ran with all its force against the tree and rammed its horn so firmly into the trunk that it had no strength left to pull it out again, and was thus successfully captured. "Now I've caught my bird," said the tailor, and he came out from behind the tree, placed the cord round its neck first, then struck the horn out of the tree with his axe, and when everything was in order, led the beast before the king. Still, The king didn't want to give him the promised reward and made a third demand. The tailor was to catch a wild boar for him that did a great deal of harm in the wood, and he might have the huntsman to help him. "Willingly," said the tailor. "That's mere child's play." But he didn't take the huntsman into the wood with him, and they were well enough pleased to remain behind, for the wild boar had often received them in a manner which did not make them desire its further acquaintance. As soon as the boar perceived the tailor, it ran at him with foaming mouth and gleaming teeth, and tried to knock him down. But our alert little friend ran into a chapel that stood near, and got out of the window again with a jump. The boar pursued him into the church, but the tailor skipped round to the door and closed it securely. So the raging beast was caught, for it was far too heavy and unwieldy to spring out of the window. The little tailor summoned the huntsmen together, that they might see the prisoner with their own eyes. Then the hero betook himself to the king, who was obliged now, whether he liked it or not, to keep his promise and hand him over his daughter and half his kingdom. Had he known that no hero warrior, but only a little tailor stood before him, it would have gone even more to his heart. So the wedding was celebrated with much splendor and little joy, and the tailor became a king. After a time the queen heard her husband saying one night in his sleep, "My lad, make that waistcoat and patch these trousers, or I'll box your ears." Thus she learned in what rank the young gentleman had been born, and next day she poured forth her woes to her father, and begged him to help her to get rid of a husband who was nothing more nor less than a tailor. The king comforted her, and said, "Leave your bedroom door open tonight. My servants shall stand outside, and when your husband is fast asleep they shall enter, bind him fast, and carry him on to a ship, which shall sail away out into the wide ocean." The queen was well satisfied with the idea, but the armor-bearer, who had overheard everything, being much attached to his young master, went straight to him and revealed the whole plot. "I'll soon put a stop to the business," said the tailor. That night he and his wife went to bed at the usual time, and when she thought he had fallen asleep, she got up, opened the door, and then lay down again. The little tailor, who had only pretended to be asleep, began to call out in a clear voice, "My lad, make that waistcoat and patch those trousers, or I'll box your ears. I have killed 7 at a blow, slain 2 giants, led a unicorn captive, and caught a wild boar. Then why should I be afraid of those men standing outside my door?" The men, when they heard the tailor saying these words, were so terrified that they fled as if pursued by a wild army, and didn't dare go near him again. So the little tailor was and remained a king all the days of his life. The Bronze Ring. Once upon a time in a certain country there lived a king whose palace was surrounded by a spacious garden. But though the gardeners were many and the soil was good, this garden yielded neither flowers nor fruits, not even grass or shady trees. The king was in despair about it, when a wise old man said to him, "Your gardeners do not understand their business, but what can you expect of men whose fathers were cobblers and carpenters? How should they have learned to cultivate your garden?" "You are quite right," cried the king. "Therefore," continued the old man, "you should send for a gardener whose father and grandfather have been gardeners before him, and very soon your garden will be full of green grass and gay flowers, and you will enjoy its delicious fruit." So the king sent messengers to every town, village, and hamlet in his dominions to look for a gardener whose forefathers had been gardeners also, and after 40 days one was found. "Come with us and be gardener to the king," they said to him. "How can I go to the king?" said the gardener. "A poor wretch like me?" "That is of no consequence," they answered. "Here are new clothes for you and your family." but I owe money to several people." "We will pay your debts," they said. So the gardener allowed himself to be persuaded and went away with the messengers, taking his wife and his son with him, and the king, delighted to have found a real gardener, entrusted him with the care of his garden. The man found no difficulty in making the royal garden produce flowers and fruit, and at the end of a year the park was not like the same place, and the king showered gifts upon his new servant. The gardener, as you have heard already, had a son who was a very handsome young man with most agreeable manners, and every day he carried the best fruit of the garden to the king, and all the prettiest flowers to his daughter. Now, this princess was wonderfully pretty, and was just 16 years old, and the king was beginning to think it was time that she should be married. "My dear child," said he, "you are of an age to take a husband. Therefore I am thinking of marrying you to the son of my prime minister." "Father," replied the princess, "I will never marry the son of the minister." "Why not?" asked the king. "Because I love the gardener's son," answered the princess. On hearing this, the king was at first very angry, and then he wept and sighed, and declared that such a husband was not worthy of his daughter. But the young princess was not to be turned from her resolution to marry the gardener's son. Then the king consulted his ministers. "This is what you must do," they said. "To get rid of the gardener, you must send both suitors to a very distant country, and the one who returns first shall marry your daughter." The king followed this advice, and the minister's son was presented with a splendid horse and a purse full of gold pieces, while the gardener's son had only an old lame horse and a purse full of copper money, and everyone thought he would never come back from his journey. The day before they started, the princess met her lover and said to him, "Be brave, and remember always that I love you. Take this purse full of jewels and make the best use you can of them for love of me, and come back quickly and demand my hand." The two suitors left the town together, but the minister's son went off at a gallop on his good horse, and very soon was lost to sight behind the most distant hills. He travelled on for some days, and presently reached a fountain beside which an old woman all in rags sat upon a stone. "Good day to you, young traveller," said she, but the minister's son made no reply. "Have pity upon me, traveller," she said again. "I am dying of hunger, as you see, and 3 days have I been here, and no one has given me anything." "Let me alone, old witch," cried the young man. "I can do nothing for you." And so saying, he went on his way. That same evening, the gardener's son rode up to the fountain upon his lame grey horse. "Good day to you, young traveller," said the beggar woman. "Good day, good woman," answered he. "Young traveller, have pity upon me." "Take my purse, good woman," said he, "and mount behind me, for your legs can't be very strong." The old woman didn't wait to be asked twice, but mounted behind him, and in this style they reached the chief city of a powerful kingdom. The minister's son was lodged in a grand inn. The gardener's son and the old woman dismounted at the inn for beggars. The next day, the gardener's son heard a great noise in the street, and the king's heralds passed, blowing all kinds of instruments and crying, "The king, our master, is old and infirm. He will give a great reward to whoever will cure him and give him back the strength of his youth." Then the old beggar woman said to her benefactor, "This is what you must do to obtain the reward which the king promises. Go out of the town by the south gate, and there you will find 3 little dogs of different colours. The first will be white, the second black, the third red. You must kill them and then burn them separately, and gather up the ashes. Put the ashes of each dog into a bag of its own colour, then go before the door of the palace and cry out, A celebrated physician has come from Janina in Albania. He alone can cure the king and give him back the strength of his youth. The king's physicians will say, 'This is an impostor and not a learned man,' and they will make all sorts of difficulties, but you will overcome them all at last, and will present yourself before the sick king. You must then demand as much wood as 3 mules can carry, and a great cauldron, and must shut yourself up in a room with the sultan, and when the cauldron boils, you must throw him into it, and there leave him until his flesh is completely separated from his bones. Then arrange the bones in their proper places and throw over them the ashes out of the 3 bags. The king will come back to life and will be just as he was when he was 20 years old. For your reward, you must demand the bronze ring which has the power to grant you everything you desire. Go, my son, and do not forget any of my instructions." The young man followed the old beggar-woman's directions. On going out of the town, he found the white, red, and black dogs and killed and burnt them, gathering the ashes in 3 bags. Then he ran to the palace and cried, "A celebrated physician has just come from Janina in Albania. He alone can cure the king and give him back the strength of his youth." The king's physicians at first laughed at the unknown wayfarer, but the sultan ordered that the stranger should be admitted. They brought the cauldron and the loads of wood, and very soon the king was boiling away. Toward midday, the gardener's son arranged the bones in their places, and he had hardly scattered the ashes over them before the old king revived, to find himself once more young and hearty. "How can I reward you, my benefactor?" he cried. "Will you take half my treasures?" "No," said the gardener's son. "My daughter's hand?" "Take half my kingdom." "No. Give me only the bronze ring, which can instantly grant me anything I wish for." "Alas," said the king, "I set great store by that marvelous ring. Nevertheless, you shall have it." And he gave it to him. The gardener's son went back to say goodbye to the old beggar-woman. Then he said to the bronze ring, "Prepare a splendid ship in which I may continue my journey. Let the hull be of fine gold, the masts of silver, the sails of brocade. Let the crew consist of 12 young men of noble appearance dressed like kings. St. Nicholas will be at the helm. As to the cargo, let it be diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and carbuncles." And immediately a ship appeared upon the sea, which resembled in every particular the description given by the gardener's son. And, stepping on board, he continued his journey. Presently he arrived at a great town and established himself in a wonderful palace. After several days he met his rival, the minister's son, who had spent all his money and was reduced to the disagreeable employment of a carrier of dust and rubbish. The gardener's son said to him, "What is your name? What is your family? And from what country do you come?" "I am the son of the prime minister of a great nation, and yet see what a degrading occupation I am reduced to. Listen to me, though I don't know anything more about you. I am willing to help you. I will give you a ship to take you back to your own country upon one condition. Whatever it may be, I accept it willingly. Follow me to my palace." The minister's son followed the rich stranger, whom he had not recognized. When they reached the palace, the gardener's son made a sign to his slaves, who completely undressed the newcomer. "Make this ring red-hot," commanded the master, "and mark the man with it upon his back." The slaves obeyed him. "Now, young man," said the rich stranger, "I am going to give you a vessel, which will take you back to your own country." And, going out, he took the bronze ring and said, "Bronze ring, obey thy master. Prepare me a ship of which the half-rotten timbers shall be painted black, Let the sails be in rags, and the sailors infirm and sickly. One shall have lost a leg, another an arm, the third shall be a hunchback, another lame or club-footed or blind, and most of them shall be ugly and covered with scars. Go, and let my orders be executed." The minister's son embarked in this old vessel, and thanks to favourable winds, at length reached his own country. In spite of the pitiable condition in which he returned, they received him joyfully. "I am the first to come back," said he to the king. "Now fulfill your promise, and give me the princess in marriage." So they at once began to prepare for the wedding festivities. As to the poor princess, she was sorrowful and angry enough about it. The next morning, at daybreak, a wonderful ship with every sail set came to anchor before the town. The king happened at that moment to be at the palace window. "What strange ship is this," he cried, "that has a golden hull, silver masts, and silken sails, and who are the young men like princes who man it? And do I not see St. Nicholas at the helm? Go at once and invite the captain of the ship to come to the palace." His servants obeyed him, and very soon in came an enchantingly handsome young prince, dressed in rich silk, ornamented with pearls and diamonds. "Young man," said the king, "you are welcome, whoever you may be. Do me the favour to be my guest as long as you remain in my capital." "Many thanks, sire," replied the captain. "I accept your offer. My daughter is about to be married," said the king. "Will you give her away?" "I shall be charmed, sire." Soon after came the princess and her betrothed. "Why, how is this?" cried the young captain. "Would you marry this charming princess to such a man as that? But he is my prime minister's son." "What does that matter? I cannot give your daughter away. The man she is betrothed to is one of my servants." "Your servant?" "Without doubt. I met him in a distant town, reduced to carrying away dust and rubbish from the houses. I had pity on him and engaged him as one of my servants." "It is impossible," cried the king. "Do you wish me to prove what I say?" This young man returned in a vessel which I fitted out for him, an unseaworthy ship with a black battered hull, and the sailors were infirm and crippled. "It is quite true," said the king. "It is false," cried the minister's son. "I do not know this man." "Sire," said the young captain, "order your daughter's betrothed to be stripped, and see if the mark of my ring is not branded upon his back." The king was about to give this order when the minister's son, to save himself from such an indignity, admitted that the story was true. "And now, sire," said the young captain, "do you not recognize me?" "I recognize you," said the princess. "You are the gardener's son whom I have always loved, and it is you I wish to marry." "Young man, you shall be my son-in-law," cried the king. "The marriage festivities are already begun, so you shall marry my daughter this very day." And so, that very day, the gardener's son married the beautiful princess. Several months passed. The young couple were as happy as the day was long, and the king was more and more pleased with himself for having secured such a son-in-law. But presently the captain of the golden ship found it necessary to take a long voyage, and after embracing his wife tenderly, he embarked. Now in the outskirts of the capital there lived an old man who had spent his life in studying black arts, alchemy, astrology, magic, and enchantment. This man found out that the gardener's son had only succeeded in marrying the princess by the help of the genii who obeyed the bronze ring. "I will have that ring," said he to himself. So he went down to the seashore and caught some little red fishes. Really, they were quite wonderfully pretty. Then he came back, and Passing before the princess's window, he began to cry out, "Who wants some pretty little red fishes?" The princess heard him and sent out one of her slaves, who said to the old peddler, "What will you take for your fish?" "A bronze ring." "A bronze ring, old simpleton. And where shall I find one?" "Under the cushion in the princess's room." The slave went back to her mistress. "The old madman will take neither gold nor silver," said she. "What does he want, then?" "A bronze ring that is hidden under a cushion." "Find the ring and give it to him," said the princess. And at last the slave found the bronze ring, which the captain of the golden ship had accidentally left behind, and carried it to the man, who made off with it instantly. Hardly had he reached his own house when, taking the ring, he said, "Bronze ring, obey thy master. I desire that the golden ship shall turn to black wood, and the crew to hideous negroes, that Saints Antia, Nicholas shall leave the helm, and that the only cargo shall be black cats." And the genii of the bronze ring obeyed him. Finding himself upon the sea in this miserable condition, the young captain understood that someone must have stolen the bronze ring from him, and he lamented his misfortune loudly. But that did him no good. "Alas," he said to himself, "whoever has taken my ring has probably taken my dear wife also. What good will it do me to go back to my own country?" And he sailed about from island to island and from shore to shore, believing that wherever he went, everybody was laughing at him. And very soon his poverty was so great that he and his crew and the poor black cats had nothing to eat but herbs and roots. After wandering about a long time, he reached an island inhabited by mice. The captain landed upon the shore and began to explore the country. There were mice everywhere, and nothing but mice. Some of the black cats had followed him, and, not having been fed for several days, they were fearfully hungry and made terrible havoc among the mice. Then the queen of the mice held a council. "These cats will eat every one of us," she said, "if the captain of the ship does not shut the ferocious animals up. Let us send a deputation to him of the bravest among us." Several mice offered themselves for this mission and set out to find the young captain. "Captain," said they, "go away quickly from our island, or we shall perish, every mouse of us." "Willingly," replied the young captain, "upon one condition. That is that you shall first bring me back a bronze ring which some clever magician has stolen from me. If you do not do this, I will land all my cats upon your island, and you shall be exterminated." The mice withdrew in great dismay. "What is to be done?" said the queen. "How can we find this bronze ring?" She held a new council, calling in mice from every quarter of the globe, but nobody knew where the bronze ring was. Suddenly, 3 mice arrived from a very distant country. One was blind, the second lame, and the third had her ears cropped. "Ho, ho, ho," said the newcomers. "We come from a far distant country. Do you know where the bronze ring is, which the genii obey?" "Ho, ho, ho! We know. An old sorcerer has taken possession of it, and now he keeps it in his pocket by day and in his mouth by night. Go and take it from him, and come back as soon as possible." So the 3 mice made themselves a boat and set sail for the magician's country. When they reached the capital, they landed and ran to the palace, leaving only the blind mouse on the shore to take care of the boat. Then they waited till it was night. The wicked old man lay down in bed and put the bronze ring into his mouth, and very soon he was asleep. "Now, what shall we do?" said the 2 little animals to each other. The mouse with the cropped ears found a lamp full of oil and a bottle full of pepper. So she dipped her tail first in the oil and then in the pepper and held it to the sorcerer's nose. "Atisha, Tisha, sneezed the old man, but he did not wake, and the shock made the bronze ring jump out of his mouth. Quick as thought, the lame mouse snatched up the precious talisman and carried it off to the boat. Imagine the despair of the magician when he awoke, and the bronze ring was nowhere to be found. But by that time our 3 mice had set sail with their prize. A favouring breeze was carrying them toward the island where the queen of the mice was awaiting them. Naturally, they began to talk about the bronze ring. "Which of us deserves the most credit?" they cried all at once. "I do," said the blind mouse, "for without my watchfulness our boat would have drifted away to the open sea." "No, indeed," cried the mouse with the cropped ears. "The credit is mine. Did I not cause the ring to jump out of the man's mouth?" "No, it is mine," cried the lame one, "for I ran off with the ring." And from high words they soon came to blows, and, alas, when the quarrel was fiercest, the bronze ring fell into the sea. "How are we to face our queen?" said the 3 mice, "when by our folly we have lost the talisman and condemned our people to be utterly exterminated? We cannot go back to our country. Let us land on this desert island and there end our miserable lives." No sooner said than done. The boat reached the island, and the mice landed. The blind mouse was speedily deserted by her 2 sisters, who went off to hunt flies. But as she wandered sadly along the shore, she found a dead fish, and was eating it, when she felt something very hard. At her cries the other 2 mice ran up. "It is the bronze ring! It is the talisman!" they cried joyfully, and, getting into their boat again, they soon reached the mouse island. It was time they did, for the captain was just going to land his cargo of cats, when a deputation of mice brought him the precious bronze ring. "Bronze ring," commanded the young man, "obey thy master. Let my ship appear as it was before." Immediately the genii of the ring set to work, and the old black vessel became once more the wonderful golden ship with sails of brocade. The handsome sailors ran to the silver masts and the silken ropes, and very soon they set sail for the capital. Ah, how merrily the sailors sang as they flew over the glassy sea. At last the port was reached. The captain landed and ran to the palace, where he found the wicked old man asleep. The princess clasped her husband in a long embrace. The magician tried to escape, but he was seized and bound with strong cords. The next day, the sorcerer, tied to the tail of a savage mule loaded with nuts, was broken into as many pieces as there were nuts upon the mule's back. The 40 Thieves. In a town in Persia there dwelt 2 brothers, one named Qasim, the other Ali Baba. Qasim was married to a rich wife and lived in plenty, while Ali Baba had to maintain his wife and children by cutting wood in a neighbouring forest and selling it in the town. One day, when Ali Baba was in the forest, he saw a troop of men on horseback coming toward him in a cloud of dust. He was afraid they were robbers and climbed into a tree for safety. When they came up to him and dismounted, he counted 40 of them. They unbridled their horses and tied them to trees. The finest man among them, whom Ali Baba took to be their captain, went a little way among some bushes and said, "Open, Sesame," so plainly that Ali Baba heard him. A door opened in the rocks, and having made the troop go in, he followed them, and the door shut again of itself. They stayed some time inside, and Ali Baba, fearing they might come out and catch him, was forced to sit patiently in the tree. At last the door opened again, and the 40 Thieves came out. As the captain went in last, he came out first, and made them all pass by him. He then closed the door, saying, "Shut, Sesame!" Every man bridled his horse and mounted. The captain put himself at their head, and they returned as they came. Then Ali Baba climbed down and went to the door concealed among the bushes, and said, "Open, Sesame!" And it flew open. Ali Baba, who expected a dull, dismal place, was greatly surprised to find it large and well lighted, hollowed by the hand of man in the form of a vault, which received the light from an opening in the ceiling. He saw rich bales of merchandise, silk, stuff, brocades, all piled together, and gold and silver in heaps, and money in leather purses. He went in, and the door shut behind him. He did not look at the silver, but brought out as many bags of gold as he thought his asses, which were browsing outside, could carry, loaded them with the bags, and hid it all with faggots, using the words, "Shut, Sesame." He closed the door and went home. Then he drove his asses into the yard, shut the gates, carried the money bags to his wife, and emptied them out before her. He bade her keep the secret, and he would go and bury the gold. "Let me first measure it," said his wife. "I will go borrow a measure of someone, while you dig the hole." So she ran to the wife of Cassim and borrowed a measure. Knowing Ali Baba's poverty, the sister was curious to find out what sort of grain his wife wished to measure, and artfully put some suet at the bottom of the measure. Ali Baba's wife went home and set the measure on the heap of gold, and filled it and emptied it often, to her great content. She then carried it back to her sister, without noticing that a piece of gold was sticking to it, which Cassim's wife perceived directly her back was turned. She grew very curious, and said to Cassim when he came home, "Cassim, your brother is richer than you. He does not count his money, he measures it." He begged her to explain this riddle, which she did by showing him the piece of money and telling him where she found it. Then Cassim grew so envious that he could not sleep, and went to his brother in the morning before sunrise. "Ali Baba," he said, showing him the gold piece, "you pretend to be poor, and yet you measure gold." By this, Ali Baba perceived that through his wife's folly, Cassim and his wife knew their secret, so he confessed all, and offered Cassim a share. "That I expect," said Cassim, "but I must know where to find the treasure, otherwise I will discover all, and you will lose all." Ali Baba, more out of kindness than fear, told him of the cave, and the very words to use. Cassim left Ali Baba, meaning to be beforehand with him and get the treasure for himself. He rose early next morning, and set out with 10 mules loaded with great chests. He soon found the place and the door in the rock. He said, "Open, Sesame," and the door opened and shut behind him. He could have feasted his eyes all day on the treasures, but he now hastened to gather together as much of it as possible. But when he was ready to go, he could not remember what to say for thinking of his great riches. Instead of Sesame, he said, "Open, Barley." And the door remained fast. He named several different sorts of grain, all but the right one, and the door still stuck fast. He was so frightened at the danger he was in that he had as much forgotten the word as if he had never heard it. About noon the robbers returned to their cave, and saw Cassim's mules roving about with great chests on their backs. This gave them the alarm. They drew their sabres, and went to the door, which opened on their captain, saying, "Open, Sesame." Cassim, who had heard the trampling of their horses' feet, resolved to sell his life dearly, so when the door opened he leaped out and threw the captain down. In vain, however, for the robbers with their sabres soon killed him. On entering the cave they saw all the bags laid ready, and could not imagine how anyone had got in without knowing their secret. They cut Cassim's body into 4 quarters, and nailed them up inside the cave, in order to frighten anyone who should venture in, and went away in search of more treasure. As night drew on, Cassim's wife grew very uneasy, and ran to her brother-in-law, and told him where her husband had gone. Ali Baba did his best to comfort her, and set out to the forest in search of Cassim. The first thing he saw on entering the cave was his dead brother. Full of horror, he put the body on one of his asses, and bags of gold on the other 2, and, covering all with some faggots, returned home. He drove the 2 asses laden with gold into his own yard, and led the other to Cassim's house. The door was opened by the slave Morgiana, whom he knew to be both brave and cunning. Unloading the ass, he said to her, "This is the body of your master, who has been murdered, but whom we must bury as though he had died in his bed. I will speak with you again, but now tell your mistress I am come." The wife of Cassim, on learning the fate of her husband, broke out into cries and tears, but Ali Baba offered to take her to live with him and his wife if she would promise to keep his counsel and leave everything to Morgiana, whereupon she agreed and dried her eyes. Morgiana, meanwhile, sought an apothecary and asked him for some lozenges. "My poor master," she said, "can neither eat nor speak, and no one knows what his distemper is." She carried home the lozenges and returned next day weeping, and asked for an essence only given to those just about to die. Thus, in the evening no one was surprised to hear the wretched shrieks and cries of Cassim's wife and Morgiana, telling everyone that Cassim was dead. The day after, Morgiana went to an old cobbler near the gates of the town, who opened his stall early, put a piece of gold in his hand, and bade him follow her with his needle and thread. Having bound his eyes with a handkerchief, she took him to the room where the body lay, pulled off the bandage, and bade him sew the quarters together, after which she covered his eyes again and led him home. Then they buried Cassim, and Morgiana his slave followed him to the grave, weeping and tearing her hair, while Cassim's wife stayed at home, uttering lamentable cries. Next day she went to live with Ali Baba, who gave Cassim's shop to his eldest son. The 40 thieves, on their return to the cave, were much astonished to find Cassim's body gone and some of their money bags. "We are certainly discovered," said the captain, "and shall be undone if we cannot find out who it is that knows our secret. 2 men must have known it. We have killed one. We must now find the other. To this end, one of you, who is bold and artful, must go into the city dressed as a traveller, and discover whom we have killed, and whether men talk of the strange manner of his death. If the messenger fails, he must lose his life, lest we be betrayed." One of the thieves started up and offered to do this, and after the rest had highly commended him for his bravery, he disguised himself, and happened to enter the town at daybreak, just by Baba Mustapha's stall. The thief bade him good day, saying, "Honest man, how can you possibly see to stitch at your age?" "Old as I am," replied the cobbler, "I have very good eyes, and will you believe me when I tell you that I sewed a dead body together in a place where I had less light than I have now?" The robber was overjoyed at his good fortune, and, giving him a piece of gold, desired to be shown the house where he stitched up the dead body. At first Mustapha refused, saying that he had been blindfolded, but when the robber gave him another piece of gold, he began to think he might remember the turnings if blindfolded as before. This means succeeded. The robber partly led him, and was partly guided by him, right in front of Cassim's house, the door of which the robber marked with a piece of chalk. Then, well pleased, he bade farewell to Baba Mustapha and returned to the forest. By and by, Morgiana, going out, saw the mark the robber had made, quickly guessed that some mischief was brewing, and fetching a piece of chalk, marked 2 or 3 doors on each side, without saying anything to her master or mistress. The thief, meantime, told his comrades of his discovery. The captain thanked him and bade him show him the house he had marked. But when they came to it, they saw that 5 or 6 of the houses were chalked in the same manner. The guide was so confounded that he knew not what answer to make, and when they returned, he was at once beheaded for having failed. Another robber was dispatched, and, having won over Baba Mustapha, marked the house in red chalk. But Morgiana, being again too clever for them, The second messenger was put to death also. The captain now resolved to go himself, but, wiser than the others, he did not mark the house, but looked at it so closely that he could not fail to remember it. He returned, and ordered his men to go into the neighboring villages and buy 19 mules and 38 leather jars, all empty except one, which was full of oil. The captain put one of his men, fully armed, into each, rubbing the outside of the jars with oil from the full vessel. Then the 19 mules were loaded with 37 robbers in jars, and the jar of oil, and reached the town by dusk. The captain stopped his mules in front of Ali Baba's house and said to Ali Baba, who was sitting outside for coolness, "I have brought some oil from a distance to sell at tomorrow's market, but it is now so late that I know not where to pass the night, unless you will do me the favor to take me in." Though Ali Baba had seen the captain of the robbers in the forest, he did not recognize him in the disguise of an oil merchant. He bade him welcome, opened his gates for the mules to enter, and went to Morgiana to bid her prepare a bed and supper for his guest. He brought the stranger into his hall, and after they had supped, went again to speak to Morgiana in the kitchen, while the captain went into the yard under pretence of seeing after his mules, but really to tell his men what to do. Beginning at the first jar and ending at the last, he said to each man, "As soon as I throw some stones from the window of the chamber where I lie, cut the jars open with your knives and come out, and I will be with you in a trice." He returned to the house, and Morgiana led him to his chamber. She then told Abdallah, her fellow slave, to set on the pot to make some broth for her master, who had gone to bed. Meanwhile her lamp went out, and she had no more oil in the house. "Do not be uneasy," said Abdallah. "Go into the yard and take some out of one of those jars." Morgiana thanked him for his advice, took the oil pot, and went into the yard. When she came to the first jar, the robber inside said softly, "Is it time?" Any other slave but Morgiana, on finding a man in the jar instead of the oil she wanted, would have screamed and made a noise. But she, knowing the danger her master was in, bethought herself of a plan, and answered quietly, "Not yet, but presently." She went to all the jars, giving the same answer, till she came to the jar of oil. She now saw that her master, thinking to entertain an oil merchant, had let 38 robbers into his house. She filled her oil pot, went back to the kitchen, and, having lit her lamp, went again to the oil jar, and filled a large kettle full of oil. When it boiled, she went and poured enough oil into every jar to stifle and kill the robber inside. When this brave deed was done, she went back to the kitchen, put out the fire and the lamp, and waited to see what would happen. In a quarter of an hour, the captain of the robbers awoke, got up, and opened the window. As all seemed quiet, he threw down some little pebbles which hit the jars. He listened, and as none of his men seemed to stir, he grew uneasy, and went down into the yard. On going to the first jar, and saying, "Are you asleep?" he smelt the hot boiled oil, and knew at once that his plot to murder Ali Baba and his household had been discovered. He found all the gang was dead, and, missing the oil out of the last jar, became aware of the manner of their death. He then forced the lock of a door leading into a garden, and climbing over several walls made his escape. Morgiana heard and saw all this, and, rejoicing at her success, went to bed and fell asleep. At daybreak, Ali Baba arose, and, seeing the oil jars still there, asked why the merchant had not gone with his mules. Morgiana bade him look in the first jar and see if there was any oil. Seeing a man, he started back in terror. "Have no fear," said Morgiana. "The man cannot harm you. He is dead." Ali Baba, when he had recovered somewhat from his astonishment, asked what had become of the merchant. "Merchant," said she, "he is no more a merchant than I am." and she told him the whole story, assuring him that it was a plot of the robbers of the forest, of whom only 3 were left, and that the white and red chalk marks had something to do with it. Ali Baba at once gave Morgiana her freedom, saying that he owed her his life. They then buried the bodies in Ali Baba's garden, while the mules were sold in the market by his slaves. The captain returned to his lonely cave, which seemed frightful to him without his lost companions, and firmly resolved to avenge them by killing Ali Baba. He dressed himself carefully and went into the town, where he took lodgings in an inn. In the course of a great many journeys to the forest, he carried away many rich stuffs and much fine linen, and set up a shop opposite that of Ali Baba's son. He called himself Khoja Hassan, and as he was both civil and well-dressed, he soon made friends with Ali Baba's son, and through him with Ali Baba, whom he was continually asking to sup with him. Ali Baba, wishing to return his kindness, invited him into his house and received him smiling, thanking him for his kindness to his son. When the merchant was about to take his leave, Ali Baba stopped him, saying, "Where are you going, sir, in such haste? Will you not stay and sup with me?" The merchant refused, saying that he had a reason, and on Ali Baba's asking him what that was, he replied, "It is, sir, that I can eat no victuals that have any salt in them." "If that is all," said Ali Baba, "let me tell you that there shall be no salt in either the meat or the bread that we eat tonight." He went to give this order to Morgiana, who was much surprised. "Who is this man," she said, "who eats no salt with his meat?" "He is an honest man, Morgiana," returned her master. "Therefore do as I bid you." But she could not withstand a desire to see this strange man, so she helped Abdallah to carry up the dishes, and saw in a moment that Khoja Hassan was the robber captain, and carried a dagger under his garment. "I am not surprised," she said to herself, "that this wicked man, who intends to kill my master, will eat no salt with him, but I will hinder his plans." She sent up the supper by Abdallah, while she made ready for one of the boldest acts that could be thought on. When the dessert had been served, Khoja Hassan was left alone with Ali Baba and his son, whom he thought to make drunk and then to murder them. Morgiana, meanwhile, put on a headdress like a dancing girl's, and clasped a girdle round her waist, from which hung a dagger with a silver hilt, and said to Abdallah, "Take your tabor, and let us go and divert our master and his guest." Abdallah took his tabor and played before Morgiana until they came to the door, where Abdallah stopped playing and Morgiana made a low courtesy. "Come in, Morgiana," said Ali Baba, "and let Khoja Hassan see what you can do." And, turning to Khoja Hassan, he said, "She's my slave and my housekeeper." Khoja Hassan was by no means pleased, for he feared that his chance of killing Ali Baba was gone for the present. But he pretended great eagerness to see Morgiana, and Abdallah began to play and Morgiana to dance. After she had performed several dances, she drew her dagger and made passes with it, sometimes pointing it at her own breast, sometimes at her master's, as if it were part of the dance. Suddenly, out of breath, she snatched the tabor from Abdallah with her left hand, and, holding the dagger in her right hand, held out the tabor to her master. Ali Baba and his son put a piece of gold into it, and Khoja Hassan, seeing that she was coming to him, pulled out his purse to make her a present, but while he was putting his hand into it, Morgiana plunged the dagger into his heart. "Unhappy girl!" cried Ali Baba and his son. "What have you done to ruin us?" "It was to preserve you, master, not to ruin you," answered Morgiana. "See here," opening the false merchant's garment and showing the dagger. "See what an enemy you have entertained. Remember, he would eat no salt with you, and what more would you have? Look at him. He is both the false oil merchant and the captain of the 40 Thieves. Ali Baba was so grateful to Morgiana for thus saving his life that he offered her to his son in marriage, who readily consented, and a few days after the wedding was celebrated with greatest splendor. At the end of a year, Ali Baba, hearing nothing of the two remaining robbers, judged they were dead and set out to the cave. The door opened on his saying, "Open sesame." He went in and saw that nobody had been there since the captain left it. He brought away as much gold as he could carry and returned to town. He told his son the secret of the cave, which his son handed down in his turn. So the children and grandchildren of Ali Baba were rich to the end of their lives. The Goose Girl. Once upon a time, an old queen, whose husband had been dead for many years, had a beautiful daughter. When she grew up, she was betrothed to a prince who lived a great way off. Now, when the time drew near for her to be married and to depart into a foreign kingdom, her old mother gave her much costly baggage and many ornaments, gold and silver, trinkets and knickknacks, and, in fact, everything that belonged to a royal trousseau, for she loved her daughter very dearly. She gave her a waiting maid also, who was to ride with her and hand her over to the bridegroom, and she provided each of them with a horse for the journey. Now the princess's horse was called Falada, and could speak. When the hour for departure drew near, the old mother went to her bedroom, and taking a small knife, she cut her fingers till they bled. Then she held a white rag under them, and letting 3 drops of blood fall into it, she gave it to her daughter and said, "Dear child, take great care of this rag. It may be of use to you on the journey." So they took a sad farewell of each other, and the princess stuck the rag in front of her dress, mounted her horse, and set forth on the journey to her bridegroom's kingdom. After they had ridden for about an hour, the princess began to feel very thirsty, and said to her waiting maid, "Pray get down and fetch me some water in my golden cup out of yonder stream. I would like a drink." "If you're thirsty," said the maid, "dismount yourself, and lie down by the water and drink. I don't mean to be your servant any longer." The princess was so thirsty that she got down, bent over the stream, and drank, for she wasn't allowed to drink out of the golden goblet. As she drank, she murmured, "Oh, heaven, what am I to do?" And the 3 drops of blood replied, "If your mother only knew, her heart would surely break in two." But the princess was meek, and said nothing about her maid's rude behavior, and quietly mounted her horse again. They rode on their way for several miles, but the day was hot, and the sun's rays smote fiercely on them, so that the princess was soon overcome by thirst again. And as they passed a brook, she called once more to her waiting maid, "Pray get down and give me a drink from my golden cup," for she had long ago forgotten her maid's rude words. But the waiting maid replied, more haughtily even than before, "If you want a drink, you can dismount and get it. I don't mean to be your servant." Then the princess was compelled by her thirst to get down, and bending over the flowing water she cried and said, "Oh, heaven, what am I to do?" And the 3 drops of blood replied, "If your mother only knew, her heart would surely break in two." And as she drank thus, and leaned right over the water, the rag containing the 3 drops of blood fell from her bosom and floated down the stream, and she, in her anxiety, never even noticed her loss. But the waiting maid had observed it with delight, as she knew it gave her power over the bride, for in losing the drops of blood, the princess had become weak and powerless. When she wished to get on her horse, Falada again, the waiting maid called out, "I mean to ride Falada. You must mount my beast," and this too she had to submit to. Then the waiting maid commanded her harshly to take off her royal robes and to put on her common ones. and finally she made her swear by heaven not to say a word about the matter when they reached the palace, and if she hadn't taken this oath, she would have been killed on the spot. But Falada observed everything and laid it all to heart. The waiting maid now mounted Falada and the real bride, the worse horse. And so they continued their journey till at length they arrived at the palace yard. There was great rejoicing over the arrival, and the prince sprang forward to meet them, and taking the waiting maid for his bride, he lifted her down from her horse and led her upstairs to the royal chamber. In the meantime, the real princess was left standing below in the courtyard. The old king, who was looking out of his window, beheld her in this plight, and it struck him how sweet and gentle, even beautiful she looked. He went at once to the royal chamber, and asked the bride who it was she had brought with her, and had left thus standing in the court below. "Oh," replied the bride, "I brought her with me to keep me company on the journey. Give the girl something to do, that she may not be idle." But the old king had no work for her, and couldn't think of anything, so he said, "I've a small boy who looks after the geese. She'd better help him." The youth's name was Curdken, and the real bride was made to assist him in herding geese. Soon after this the false bride said to the prince, "Dearest husband, I pray you grant me a favour." He answered, "That I will." "Then let the slaughterer cut off the head of the horse I rode here upon, because it behaved very badly on the journey." But the truth was, she was afraid lest the horse should speak and tell how she had treated the princess. She carried her point, and the faithful Falada was doomed to die. When the news came to the ears of the real princess, she went to the slaughterer, and secretly promised him a piece of gold if he would do something for her. There was in the town a large dark gate, through which she had to pass night and morning with the geese. Would he kindly hang up Falada's head there, that she might see it once again? The slaughterer said he would do as she desired, chopped off the head and nailed it firmly over the gateway. Early next morning, as she and Curdken were driving their flock through the gate, she said as she passed under, "Oh, Falada, 'tis you hang there." And the head replied, "'Tis you, pass under, princess fair. If your mother only knew, her heart would surely break in two." Then she left the tower and drove the geese into a field. And when they had reached the common where the geese fed, she sat down and unloosed her hair, which was of pure gold. Curdken loved to see it glitter in the sun, and wanted much to pull some hair out. Then she spoke, "Wind, wind, gently sway, blow Curdken's hat away, let him chase o'er field and wold, till my locks of ruddy gold, now astray and hanging down, be combed and plaited in a crown." Then a gust of wind blew Curdken's hat away, and he had to chase it over hill and dale. When he returned from the pursuit, she had finished her combing and curling, and his chance of getting any hair was gone. Curdken was very angry and wouldn't speak to her, so they herded the geese till evening and then went home. The next morning, as they passed under the gate, the girl said, "Oh, Falada, 'tis you hang there." And the head replied, "'Tis you, pass under, princess fair. If your mother only knew, her heart would surely break in two." Then she went on her way till she came to the common, where she sat down and began to comb out her hair. Then Curdken ran up to her and wanted to grasp some of the hair from her head, but she called out hastily, "Wind, wind, gently sway, blow Curdken's hat away. Let him chase o'er field and wold, till my locks of ruddy gold, now astray and hanging down, be combed and plaited in a crown." Then a puff of wind came and blew Curdken's hat far away, so that he had to run after it. And when he returned, She had long finished putting up her golden locks, and he couldn't get any hair, so they watched the geese till it was dark. But that evening when they got home, Curdken went to the old king and said, "I refuse to herd geese any longer with that girl." "For what reason?" asked the old king. "Because she does nothing but annoy me all day long," replied Curdken, and he proceeded to relate all her iniquities, and said, "Every morning as we drive the flock through the dark gate, she says to a horse's head that hangs on the wall, 'Oh, Falada, 'tis you, hang there,' and the head replies, ''Tis you, pass under, princess fair.' If your mother only knew, her heart would surely break in two." And Curdken went on to tell what passed on the common where the geese fed, and how he had always to chase his hat. The old king bade him go and drive forth his flock as usual next day, and when morning came he himself took up his position behind the dark gate, and heard how the Goose Girl greeted Falada. Then he followed her through the field, and hid himself behind a bush on the common. He soon saw with his own eyes how the Goose Boy and the Goose Girl looked after the geese, and how after a time the maiden sat down and loosed her hair, that glittered like gold, and repeated, "Wind, wind, gently sway, blow Curdken's hat away, let him chase o'er field and wold, till my locks of ruddy gold, now astray and hanging down, be combed and plaited in a crown." Then a gust of wind came and blew Curdken's hat away, so that he had to fly over hill and dale after it, and the girl in the meantime quietly combed and plaited her hair. All this the old king observed, and returned to the palace without anyone having noticed him. In the evening, when the Goose Girl came home, he called her aside and asked her why she behaved as she did. "I may not tell you why. How dare I confide my woes to anyone? For I swore not to by heaven, otherwise I should have lost my life." The old king begged her to tell him all, and left her no peace, but he could get nothing out of her. At last he said, "Well, if you won't tell me, confide your trouble to the iron stove there," and he went away. Then she crept to the stove and began to sob and cry and to pour out her poor little heart, and said, "Here I sit, deserted by all the world. I, who am a king's daughter, and a false waiting maid, has forced me to take off my own clothes, and has taken my place with my bridegroom, while I have to fulfill the lowly office of Goose Girl. If my mother only knew, her heart would surely break in two." But the old king stood outside at the stove chimney and listened to her words. Then he entered the room again, and bidding her leave the stove, he ordered royal apparel to be put on her, in which she looked amazingly lovely. Then he summoned his son, and revealed to him that he had got the false bride, who was nothing but a waiting maid, while the real one, in the guise of the ex-Goose Girl, was standing at his side. The young king rejoiced from his heart when he saw her beauty, and learned how good she was, and a great banquet was prepared, to which everyone was bidden. The bridegroom sat at the head of the table, the princess on one side of him, and the waiting maid on the other. But she was so dazzled that she did not recognize the princess in her glittering garments. Now, when they had eaten and drunk, and were merry, the old king asked the waiting maid to solve a knotty point for him. "What," said he, "should be done to a certain person who has deceived everyone?" And he proceeded to relate the whole story, ending up with, "Now what sentence should be passed?" Then the false bride answered, "She deserves to be put stark naked into a barrel lined with sharp nails, which should be dragged by 2 white horses up and down the street till she is dead." "You are the person," said the king, "and you have passed sentence on yourself, and even so it shall be done to you." And when the sentence had been carried out, the young king was married to his real bride, and both reigned over the kingdom in peace and happiness.